Our story begins in a gym where young people were practicing their martial arts. Among them was our main character, who, together with his partner, was practicing his skills. The young man was practicing his diamond fist and was able to inflict heavy damage on his comrade, causing him to wince. He noted his progress and asked if he had reached subtlety yet, and Simon confirmed that he had broken through to it 2 days ago. Subtlety is one of the levels of martial arts mastery in this world, along with beginning, mastery, achievement, and perfection. Hearing this, the student declared that no one in the class could match Simon's diamond fist. However, the hero was not in the mood for conversation. He stated that if he had rested, they could continue training. However, his friend called him a training maniac, jokingly stated that he would no longer train with him and went home. Before leaving, the boy said goodbye to the teacher, who asked him to carefully fold his things before leaving. As Simon was about to leave, the teacher stopped him and reminded him of the 30,000 registration fee for the martial arts department. The man said the payment deadline was the following Monday, and the hero asked for a few extra days. However, the teacher only explained that he understood his family situation, but the rules could not be broken. Left alone in the training room, Simon continued training, this time alone. In the process, he thought about the sum of 30,000. Then he remembered his past. His parents died during a disaster caused by ferocious monsters when he was only 3 years old. After that, he was raised by his uncle and aunt, who noticed his talent for martial arts and supported his training all this time. They hoped that this would help him get a well-paid profession in the future. This made the boy feel guilty, realizing that his dream was only making life more difficult for those close to him. Late in the evening, he finally returned home and accidentally overheard his uncle and aunt talking about money. They decided the rent could wait, and paying Simon's registration was more important. Aunt said she was going to find another job. At the same time, the uncle suggested giving up medication for the sake of saving money, believing that little Simon's talent could not be wasted. Feeling guilty, Simon paused for a moment at the entrance to the house. He slapped his cheeks hard to clear the tears from his eyes, then prepared to go inside. When the hero opened the door, his aunt immediately became worried that he had been training late again and was clearly exhausted. Then Simon offered to help them, but his aunt said that she could handle such a trifle herself and suggested that he go and rest. Soon after this, the hero went to his room. Simon lay awake, thinking about the sacrifices his aunt and uncle had made for his well-being. Then he decided to solve this problem. He knew only one place where a martial arts master could earn that kind of money in a couple of days. The next day, Simon went to an underground martial arts arena. The presenter greeted the audience and said that in this place only victories and defeats mattered. She then introduced the fighter of the evening, nicknamed the Minotaur, who turned out to be Simon in disguise. To win the $60,000 prize, he needed to win 4 times in a row. The crowd looked at the mysterious fighter with curiosity and whispered, believing that he was a newcomer. The presenter then asked Simon to stir up the audience's interest, but he didn't understand what exactly he needed to do. Therefore, the girl explained to him that it was necessary to tease the audience. The hero immediately understood the hint, after which he loudly declared that he was invincible and invited all the weaklings to come out against him. The public was shocked by his arrogance and decided that he would not last long. However, this was precisely what got the crowd excited, and the spectators began to roar with impatience, wanting to see the fight begin as soon as possible. Simon felt the tension in the air, but he continued to focus on fighting for money. Soon, a guy in a rat mask climbed into the ring, ready to face him. Simon analyzed his opponent and noticed a weakness in his stance. The enemy lunged forward with a blow while Simon seemed distracted. However, the main character quickly got his bearings and responded to the attack. He raised an open fist and launched a lightning-fast counterattack at the rat-masked fighter. The blow was so powerful that the rat fighter literally flew across the entire ring. Simon celebrated his first victory and immediately demanded his next opponent. The crowd was absolutely delighted by the Minotaur's impressive performance. Then, a new fighter entered the arena and declared that Simon would have no luck this time. The hero invited him to start the fight, deciding to use this guy to test his own strength. The opponent did not waste time and immediately rushed forward. However, Simon stopped his blow with his fist, creating a powerful shockwave. The enemy was amazed by his strength and froze, not knowing what to do next. At the same time, Simon himself was well aware that he was superior to him. Taking advantage of the moment, The guy delivered a powerful blow straight to the big guy's face. Simon then noticed that he had put too much force into the attack and had opened his body completely. So he immediately took advantage of the opportunity and delivered a crushing kick to the side. The blow was so powerful that the fighter was thrown far outside the arena. Thus, Simon easily secured his second victory in a row. After that, he was left alone in the center of the ring, waiting for a new opponent. Meanwhile, in a luxurious private room, a man in a suit noticed that the Minotaur was too strong for the apprentice. This man saw that the Minotaur had already won 3 victories and decided to arrange the next fight. At that moment, the masked fighter offered to fight him, and the boss ordered him to hide his true strength. Meanwhile, Simon thought that thanks to his new fist technique, dealing with these fighters was as easy as pie. But then he focused again, realizing he was just 1 win away from the $60,000 he needed. Suddenly, he saw his last opponent. The crowd immediately recognized the new challenger as the White Fox. The audience made a fuss because he was a semi-martial arts master, which was effectively considered cheating. Simon understood that this fight would be difficult, but he did not even allow the thought of defeat to enter his mind. The White Fox grinned smugly, showing his confidence. He then stated that Simon had no need to be afraid because he knew his own limits. When both fighters took their places in the ring, the host announced the final fight. As soon as the bell rang, both opponents rushed towards each other at great speed. Simon decided to go all out from the start. He launched a powerful blow, but the White Fox stopped him with an equally powerful counterblow. The hero was shocked to feel the power contained within him and realized that this man was far from an ordinary half-master. Then it dawned on him that his opponent was a true martial arts master and was simply hiding his abilities. After this, the White Fox noticed that Simon was distracted. He used a move called Thunder Strike and struck his opponent. The impact was terrifying, and Simon felt the overwhelming power of a true martial artist. People in the audience immediately recognized this technique and had already written off the Minotaur. The White Fox continued to attack and taunt Simon relentlessly, demanding that he fight back. However, Simon could only defend himself, realizing that with such a development of events, he would inevitably lose. He needed to find an opportunity to counterattack, but his opponent left him no chance. During a brief defensive lapse, one of the White Fox's strikes still found its mark. A crushing blow with enormous force landed right on Simon's face. The blow sent the guy flying and falling to the ground, completely disorientated. Lying on the floor, Simon felt his consciousness gradually fade after the attack. The White Fox stepped on his mask and announced that Simon would not receive a cent of the prize money. However, he then offered the hero to join them, promising to pay money in that case. But Simon refused. Then the White Fox warned that the price of refusal would be too high for him. Lying on the arena floor, Simon said that as a martial artist, he should have honor, but he does such things. The White Fox lost his patience when he saw that there was no point in talking any further. So he decided to finish off Simon so that he could never fight again. The threat echoed in Simon's head as he thought about his dream. At that moment, the White Fox rushed forward to deliver a kick, intending to end the fight. However, Simon dodged at the last moment, and the White Fox was caught off guard. Despite all the blows he had received, Simon rose to his feet, surrounded by a blazing aura. The opponent was shocked that the guy withstood his attacks and was still standing on his feet. Using sheer willpower, Simon remembered his family and all the sacrifices they had made for his dream. He knew he couldn't accept a future in which he would let them all down. Suddenly, a mysterious screen appeared in front of him, asking him what he was willing to sacrifice for his faith and family. Then Simon shouted furiously that he was ready to sacrifice everything. The system asked if he agreed to pay the required price, and Simon shouted out that he did. The next moment, Simon found himself transported into a strange space that resembled a digital world. While he was trying to figure out where he was, an ominous shadow appeared from the darkness. Then an extraterrestrial golden figure appeared in front of him, emitting an incredibly bright light. This entity said that it was going to give him a chance, after which it began to gradually disappear. The creature's golden light rushed towards Simon and completely enveloped him. A golden system screen appeared in front of him, floating in the air, displaying all of Simon's stats. The hero became interested and touched the screen to check if it was touch-sensitive. His finger immediately landed on the first task button, opening a notification for a random mission. This mission turned out to be a training exercise, the purpose of which was to defeat the White Fox and improve his martial arts. Simon wondered what the beginner's guide was like, and then suddenly his own clone appeared behind him and immediately rushed to attack. However, thanks to reflexes alone, Simon managed to dodge his double's blow. Simon realized that the clone had used his diamond fist technique perfectly, just as it was described in the manual. Seeing a true master in his double, the hero decided that he could not miss such a chance to learn. So he immediately entered the fight and began exchanging blows with his copy. Simon soon realized that the clone had demonstrated a perfect fighting technique and was completely superior to it. However, the doppelganger had no intention of holding back and delivered a fully charged punch straight into Simon's stomach. The blow was so strong that it threw the guy far back. However, the hero noticed that his diamond fist technique had improved and was amazed at how quickly he was progressing. Simon smiled and realized that this place allowed him to develop his skills incredibly quickly. So they continued to fight at full strength again, without stopping their intensive training. With each new strike, Simon's skill in using the diamond fist grew more and more. In addition, they practiced the void step, and their mastery of this technique rapidly increased. In a short time, all of his skills approached the maximum level. His floating light palm technique reached the first level of fine mastery. Immediately after this, the void step also reached the same level. Then, after the final decisive blow, Diamond Fist finally reached the level of a master. When the training was over, the clone dissolved into golden light, leaving Simon alone and completely exhausted. After the lesson ended, the system congratulated him and asked if he wanted to return to reality. The hero agreed, and at that very moment he found himself back in the arena, right in front of his opponent, the White Fox. Irritated by everything that was happening, the White Fox immediately rushed at Simon with all his strength. He attacked with the Thunder Fist technique, intending to finish the fight completely. However, Simon easily dodged the blow, thinking it was too slow. Then the guy delivered a powerful blow to his opponent with incredible speed. The hit landed right on the enemy's face and blew his mask into pieces. Simon looked at the enemy with confidence after such a crushing blow. The crowd was shocked by this incredible comeback. Soon, the White Fox was defeated, and Simon won the duel. He then turned to the presenter and asked when he could receive his prize money. Meanwhile, the arena boss was shocked from his office that the student had managed to raise the Diamond Fist to the level of a master. Intrigued by what was happening, the man ordered his men to follow Simon and find out his identity. Having received the money, Simon left the arena through a dark city alley. However, before approaching the house, he looked around suspiciously, feeling that he was being followed. The hero quickly managed to escape from the two men who had been pursuing him since leaving the arena. They began to panic because they had lost sight of Simon and did not know his real identity. However, they had no idea that at that moment Simon was right above them, hiding in the darkness between the walls of the alley. Thanks to this, he successfully escaped and reached a safe roof nearby. After that, Simon returned home. His aunt and uncle were shocked by the amount of money and asked if he had robbed a bank. The boy then lied, explaining that the dojo master had decided to sponsor him after seeing his outstanding talent. Simon continued to adhere to this version and asked his relatives to trust him. Hearing this, his aunt and uncle were filled with pride and believed in his promising future. After the conversation, Simon went up to the roof to think for a bit. He felt relieved that he had managed to solve the family's financial problems. The hero thanked the system for its help, but noticed that only his skills had changed. Then a notification appeared explaining that combat value could be used to improve other stats. Without thinking, Simon decided to test it out and invested points into his vitality. And his vitality increased from 85 to 90. At that moment, he felt an incredible power spreading throughout his entire body. Then, an energetic aura completely enveloped him. Looking at his stats, Simon realized that he had reached the level of a quasi-martial arts warrior. Inspired, he decided to invest all his remaining points into vitality. After this, the guy noticed that all his injuries had disappeared, and he himself had become stronger than ever before. Filled with energy, Simon began jumping from roof to roof, wanting to test his current strength. Then he decided to go to school and test his abilities on the combat simulator. Arriving at the training grounds of Star City First High School, the hero approached a strange device. It was used to measure a person's strength, although it was only a first-level equipment. Despite this, Simon prepared himself and decided to use 70% of his power. With a concentrated effort, he delivered the most powerful blow of his life. The attack hit the simulator with destructive force. And then the guy got a little nervous because of the power of his own blow. The car was completely destroyed, and Simon wondered if he would now have to pay for the damage. The noise attracted the attention of those around, so the hero decided to hide as quickly as possible. At that moment, an elderly man in pajamas appeared, furious about the broken exercise machine. He immediately suspected two students, Chris and Liam, and vowed to teach the culprit a serious lesson once classes started. The next day, all the students of the graduating year gathered in the school gym. Standing in lines, Simon noticed a bump on Chris's head and asked his friend what had happened. As it turns out, it was Chris who was accused of destroying the exercise equipment at the training ground last night. At this point, the director ordered everyone to calm down and introduced his comrade in arms, Jonathan, a third-level master. Jonathan arrived to teach the students a C-rank martial art called Thunder Charge Fist. At that moment, Simon remembered his fight with the White Fox and noted that he used a technique with exactly the same name. If he wanted to study such an art outside of school, the registration fee alone would cost several thousand. Jonathan addressed the students, demanding that they stop talking and watch the demonstration of the technique carefully. He said that he was going to perform the technique 10 times, and how well the students could master it depended on them. After that, Jonathan suddenly changed his stance and explained that the Thunder Charge Fist was characterized by a ferocious and overwhelming power. At the basic level, this strike was accompanied by one clap of thunder. At the master level, the fighter could already create 3 thunder sounds. As for the master level that Jonathan was currently at, the blow was accompanied by 7 claps of thunder. Jonathan's students shouldn't set their goals too high just yet. Achieving the basic level would already be more than enough. Jonathan then loudly ordered everyone to repeat after him carefully and began the second demonstration of the technique. After several hours, almost all the students were completely exhausted, but no one had managed to master the technique. Simon's friend, trembling and breathing heavily, noted that mastering the Thunder Dash Fist was almost impossible. However, when he turned towards Simon, he found that the workout-obsessed guy was nowhere to be seen. It was at this moment that their classmate Chris happily announced that he had managed to reach the basic level. The director tried to praise Chris's achievement, noting that it was truly noteworthy. Soon, the two elderly masters left the school gymnasium. Jonathan immediately noted how weak the students in this group were. However, Director Lee countered that the mere fact that one student had reached the basic level was a good result. Jonathan replied that the path of martial arts development was extremely brutal, so talent played a decisive role. However, it was at that moment that both of them suddenly felt a powerful surge of fighting energy nearby. Quickly identifying the source, they saw Simon performing Thunder Dash Fist at a master level. The director, in complete shock, replied that it was impossible since he had never heard of this man. When Simon performed the technique again, Jonathan noted that the student was now able to produce 9 thunderclaps. Then the man smiled broadly and admitted that he finally understood everything. The next moment, his fist was enveloped in yellow lightning. He then performed Thunder Dash Fist and unexpectedly managed to break his own limit. The director watched the scene with shock and alarm after hearing 8 thunderclaps. Jonathan confirmed that the technique he had just seen Simon use had given him the inspiration he needed. Both old men jumped over the fence and rushed towards the site, hoping to find the mysterious student. But they were too late. The hero was already heading to training. He didn't expect how tiring cultivating a C-rank art would be. Opening the system window, Simon was pleased to see that his Thunder Dash Fist had already reached the perfect level. Simon soon arrived at his place of work, the Raging Thunder Dojo. Inside, he saw several students training diligently under the guidance of their instructors. A guy with brown hair approached him and asked why he had come. While they were talking, the purple-haired boy suddenly kicked one of the students to the ground. The angry young man declared that he dared to claim that his teacher had taught his students poorly. It turned out that the purple-haired boy's teacher was a newly appointed instructor. He possessed great strength, but he looked down on ordinary people like them and conducted his studies in a very superficial manner. This guy's name was Cruz, and he raised his fist and declared that his opponent should not have challenged him with such a pathetic level of training. However, before he could strike, Simon intercepted his hand. The hero warned him to stop the attack immediately. Cruz stated that if Simon had the guts to interfere, He should have entered the arena for a one-on-one fight. However, at that very moment, the instructor appeared, wanting to know the cause of the noise. And besides, the lesson was about to begin. Cruz freed himself and stepped aside, finally remarking that Simon was very lucky. However, the protagonist did not perceive this as a threat, and only noted to himself how arrogant Cruz was. Then, Master Cruz announced to his students that this day would be the last day he would teach them the Spear of the Raging Sea technique. After this, the man began to demonstrate the technique, moving with amazing ease and grace. He glanced at the crowd of students and was sure that none of them would be able to master the technique from just one demonstration. However, Simon was not only going to prove him wrong, but to perfect this technique as quickly as possible. His gaze carefully followed every detail of the middle-aged man's movements. When the demonstration was over, the instructor lowered his spear and headed for the exit with Cruz. He then announced that he had finished the demonstration, and how well the students had learned the material depended solely on them. Hearing this, the crowd became enraged and began to revolt, claiming that such training was a real deception. Meanwhile, Simon had already grasped the basic essence of the spear technique. He realized that the spear was supposed to move like a water dragon, and the technique itself was based on the momentum of the waves. After this, the hero took a stance and began to perform the technique without much difficulty. The smoothness of his movements amazed those around him. Shocked spectators began to wonder what kind of martial arts genius this guy was. Cruz heard the noise and returned to the room, and upon hearing that someone had managed to master the technique, he immediately asked who they were talking about. The crowd parted silently, allowing him to see Simon performing the technique with ease. Although Cruz was shocked by what he saw, his expression did not change, and he then decided to test the depth of his understanding of the technique. The guy called out to the hero and offered to give him some advice. The hero did not refuse, although he was not sure that Cruz could teach him anything useful. His friend worriedly tried to warn him that despite Cruz's character, he possessed quite a lot of strength. However, Simon assured his friend that there was nothing to worry about, and then the hero asked Cruz to enlighten him. However, seeing Simon's confident behavior, the arrogant guy himself called him too self-confident. After that, Cruz demonstrated the Spear of the Raging Sea technique on a micro level. In response, Simon only sighed. He then performed the technique himself at a master level. Cruz couldn't understand how anyone could ever reach that level after just one demonstration. Simon's movements flowed like a tidal wave and overwhelmed Cruz's micro-level technique. He didn't believe that an ordinary student who wasn't a master could master the Spear of the Raging Sea technique to the level of a master. Such an achievement was beyond the reach of even many experienced practitioners. At that moment, a system notification appeared before Simon's eyes. The system reported that he had defeated a higher-level opponent and received 35 combat value. Then the hero was finally convinced that his guess was correct. Ordinary training fights also brought combat value. Cruz couldn't comprehend what had happened. He had trained for many years, but Simon had reached the level of a master in such a short time. At that point, he began to wonder what the point of all his efforts was. Unwilling to admit defeat, he suddenly lunged at Simon. However, before the situation could get out of control, the instructor appeared. Seeing what was happening, the man immediately intervened and sternly reprimanded his student. Then he slapped his student. If Cruz couldn't accept defeat, then he had no right to be called a master. The young man himself simply froze in shock and said nothing in response. However, the instructor's gaze soon moved to Simon. Even the geniuses of the imperial capital were not capable of such a thing. Afterwards, the instructor apologized for Cruz's behavior and added that meeting Simon was a great success for his student. Simon was momentarily taken aback. He didn't expect the instructor to change his attitude so quickly. When the hero left the training ground, the accumulated fatigue finally made itself felt. But it was a pleasant fatigue. Not only did he master the Thunder Charge Fist and the Raging Sea Spear, but he also earned a considerable amount of combat value. The entrance exam was approaching faster and faster, and wealthy students were already preparing high-quality weapons from alloys. If Simon wanted to compete with them on equal terms, he also needed a similar weapon, and the hero decided to use a spear. At the same time, he understood perfectly well that the money he had was barely enough even to cover his aunt's medical expenses. However, he was not going to give up. In his opinion, there had to be another way to solve this problem. It was then that an advertisement caught his attention, stating that the city lord was recruiting craftsmen to hunt monsters. Hearing this, Simon realized that this was exactly the opportunity he had been waiting for. Meanwhile, at home, Simon's aunt turned to her husband and remarked that he should not have worked so much. However, the uncle replied that while he could work, he did not intend to rely on Simon and wanted to earn as much as he could himself. When Simon entered the house, he greeted his relatives warmly. The hero asked them to rest, assuring them that he would now be able to earn money himself. However, the uncle only laughed and replied that he had no intention of sitting idle while he was able to work, at least for the sake of daily expenses. His aunt supported him, adding that it would be better for them to save as much money as possible. Thus, in the future, Simon could fully concentrate on developing martial arts. Hearing this, the hero realized that until they started earning enough, they would not stop exhausting themselves with work. He knew he couldn't pass up the chance to hunt ferocious animals for a reward. That same night, Simon went up to the roof and opened the stats panel again. He understood how dangerous the wilderness was, so he decided to invest all his remaining fighting value into his life force. 2 days later, Simon lay on the floor of the training room, completely exhausted. But his skills had reached a complete level. He let out a sigh, realizing that the days of continuous training had paid off, and now it was time to move on. The next morning, Simon went to the Star City Martial Arts Masters base. Although he had seen this place many times on the news, being there in person was a completely different experience. Martial arts masters were everywhere, their powerful presence literally filling the streets. Simon studied the booklet he was holding. It told how many coins were given for killing different animals. Below was a rule. Only the left ear of the beast was accepted as proof. Without it, the reward would not be given. Nearby, he noticed a man at the reception desk who asked the employee to calculate the cost of his loot. However, at that moment, a noise suddenly arose at the entrance, and someone loudly demanded that Mr. E be cleared of the way. Simon looked in that direction and immediately noticed the arrogant young man walking forward. The hero frowned. This aura reminded him of the white fox from the underground arena. Meanwhile, quiet conversations began to be heard around Simon, people calling young Master Ye a poser. Simon listened to the conversations in silence, then looked up at the blonde again. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and apparently the guy also recognized the main character. At that moment, Simon couldn't help but think that the real danger was not only from animals, but also from people. So he reminded himself that he had to remain cautious under all circumstances. When the hero was about to leave the base, one of the guards looked at him and noticed that he looked too young. He asked if it was his first time going into the wilderness alone. The guy only answered briefly and continued on his way. Finding himself in the wilderness, Simon looked around carefully. The forest was dense and quiet, almost peaceful at first glance. However, he immediately reminded himself that he could not let his guard down. The hero was determined to return with results. 2 hours passed as Simon went deeper and deeper into the forest, and during all this time, he did not encounter a single ferocious animal. This made him wonder if all the animals near the outer part of the territory had already been destroyed. With this thought, the guy quickened his pace and headed even deeper into the forest. However, suddenly his expression changed and a huge, ferocious beast appeared right in front of him. The creature was exactly as described by Simon in his textbooks. The protagonist instantly recognized him as a level 1 moonwolf of the initial stage. The beast looked at him with bloodshot eyes, baring its fangs. As the beast tensed and prepared to spring, Simon took a deep breath and concentrated. The wolf rushed forward, sharp claws outstretched. However, Simon reacted instantly. He immediately moved to the side. He then delivered a thunder dash fist straight into his opponent's stomach. The blow threw the beast back. The monster's huge body crashed into a tree with a loud thud. The wolf collapsed to the ground and almost lost the ability to move. Simon looked down at his slightly trembling hands, feeling the residual strength that continued to flow through his body. The hero couldn't help but think that battles with real ferocious beasts were much more exciting. Simon began to wonder how he would deal with a mid-stage beast when a huge figure appeared behind him. However, before the beast could strike, a fist filled with the power of lightning crashed down on the monster and threw it to the ground. Simon exhaled slowly, realizing how much his strength had grown. Now there was almost nothing to threaten him with. After taking the monster's left ear, Simon received a reward of 3,000 yuan, and at that moment a system notification appeared before his eyes. The system reported that the combat value was already sufficient for a breakthrough, an official becoming a martial arts master. However, before the hero could rejoice, a terrifying roar rolled through the forest. He turned towards the source of the sound and realized that this creature was significantly stronger than all his previous opponents. Curiosity eventually won out, and the boy moved forward cautiously. Soon he reached a huge rock, climbed up and saw a giant monster fighting with a group of hunters. It was a late-stage, first-tier ferocious beast, the black jade python. Its huge body was terrifying. The hunters were clearly losing to him. One after another, they flew away to the sides, completely overwhelmed by the monster. Simon watched what was happening carefully. This creature was on a completely different level, and at that moment, Simon suddenly felt that he was in mortal danger. The hero instantly jumped to the side, and this saved his life. The giant beast attacked the very spot where he had just been standing. His spiked tail struck the ground with monstrous force, but the python did not stop. Simon barely had time to land before he was forced to dodge again. But despite this, the powerful blow still sent him flying. Having spat out a clot of blood, the hero finally realized how fast this monster was. Having regained his balance, Simon noticed a dead hunter nearby. He was very sorry to see that the monster had already managed to kill the man, but he quickly pulled himself together. Then he took his spear and quietly said that he would borrow it for a while. After this, the hero turned to the beast again. The giant python rose to its full height and opened its mouth wide, preparing for another attack. Simon avoided the blow at the last moment by rolling to the side. Usually, defeating a late-stage first-tier ferocious beast required several martial artists. However, now he already possessed the strength to fight such an opponent alone. Using Void Step, he began to swiftly move across the battlefield, dodging the monster's attacks with blinding speed. The hero then counterattacked and lunged with his spear, using the Spear of the Raging Sea technique. The blow pierced the beast's skin, causing it to let out a furious roar. The python began to writhe madly in pain. However, Simon had no intention of stopping and immediately continued jumping on it. He attacked the snake again, his movements remaining smooth and precise. Simon gradually drove the huge monster into a state of true rage. However, the monster's body was too huge, so delivering one decisive fatal blow proved extremely difficult. The difference in size made it difficult to hit the vital point. As Simon maneuvered around the enemy, he constantly reminded himself to remain patient. First, he needed to weaken the beast, and only then wait for the right opportunity. It was at this moment that the monster attacked again. His massive body rushed forward straight at the protagonist. Simon responded with a perfectly executed Thunder Dash fist. But the fight was far from over. Simon understood perfectly well that after each successful attack, he could not afford to linger near the enemy. He needed to retreat immediately, increase the distance, and look for a new opportunity to strike. With each new exchange of blows, he felt his breathing become heavier. This style of fighting was very exhausting. But Simon realized that the beast was also approaching its limit. And then the guy thought that there was very little left. If he can withstand a few more exchanges like this, he will be able to finish off his opponent. After this, the hero gathered his strength and prepared for the next clash. But suddenly a chill of danger ran down his spine. Something was wrong. And before he could react, an unexpected enemy attacked him from behind. And although the hero managed to block, the stranger's blow was too strong. The blow sent Simon flying backwards, his body falling heavily to the ground. He forced himself to turn over and tried to get up, feeling his whole body trembling. Only then did the hero realize that he had been ambushed. With difficulty rising to his feet, he demanded to see who had attacked him. The leader of the squad, the same blonde man, laughed loudly and mockingly asked what it was like to be caught off guard. It was clear that he was going to take revenge on the main character for that defeat during the tournament. When the blonde man, Michael, first saw Simon dare to leave the city alone, he was sure that he would die there. However, he could not even imagine how lucky he would be. Simon not only survived, but also discovered a python. Meanwhile, Simon noted that all 5 were martial artists and had a numerical advantage. Suddenly, a big guy rushed forward and demanded to know why the guy still hadn't left here after the order from young Master E. Hearing this, Simon's face instantly darkened. His fist was enveloped in electric discharges, and an aura appeared around his body. The hero stated that the enemy had previously managed to push him back only thanks to a surprise attack. The next moment, Simon met the oncoming fist with his own punch. As their attacks collided with a deafening roar, the big man immediately felt the terrifying power of his opponent. The next blow followed almost instantly. The force of the blow was so enormous that the enemy's mask shattered into pieces. After this, he lost consciousness, and the rest of the group watched as their comrade collapsed from just one blow. Then Michael praised Simon and came to the conclusion that Simon really was the Minotaur from the underground arena. A drop of sweat rolled down the hero's cheek, and at that moment, he too became convinced that Michael really was the White Fox. Michael admitted that Simon was the first person who had managed to humiliate him so badly in front of a large number of people. Immediately after this, the rest of the fighters rushed forward as soon as they received the order from their leader. Their goal was to kill Simon. However, before the three opponents had time to surround him, the hero grabbed the borrowed spear and started to run. He jumped over a small cliff and quickly disappeared among the trees. By the time the group reached the forest, they had already lost sight of it. The forest ahead was becoming especially dense, so one of the pursuers warned the others to be careful. But another immediately objected. He thought there were too many of them to be afraid of one person. But just at that moment, Simon appeared behind him. The enemy only managed to notice a vague silhouette. After this, he immediately received a heavy blow. Blood gushed from his nose and mouth, and he instantly lost consciousness. Michael cursed at the sight of this terrible picture, but he could not understand how Simon became so fast. The remaining three stood back to back, the hooded man noting that Simon had used Thunder Fist. In addition, he noticed 9 echoes, which meant that he had achieved a perfect level of mastery of the technique. Meanwhile, Simon watched the trio. He understood that if he had not spent too much energy, he could have crushed the entire group. However, now all he could do was look for an opportunity to eliminate the enemies one by one. And then the guy threw a spear at them. He wasn't aiming at anyone in particular, but the weapon provided the necessary distraction. Taking advantage of this brief moment, Simon rushed towards the weakest of the remaining opponents, the man with the tail. He then delivered a powerful knee strike straight into the enemy's face, shattering the enemy's skull and sending blood flying everywhere. The remaining two didn't even have time to get a good look at Simon before they saw their comrade collapse lifelessly to the ground. After this, the hooded man began to panic and suggested getting out of there since Simon was too strong. However, Michael immediately rejected this idea and stated that he was going to kill Simon right there, no matter what. Meanwhile, Simon began to circle around his opponents, moving along the trunks and branches of trees with frightening speed. At that very moment, the hooded man's head hit the ground with a crash. Michael gritted his teeth in fear, still unable to comprehend how much stronger Simon had become in just a few days. The next moment, Simon's silhouette appeared behind him. However, turning around sharply, Michael noticed that the spear had disappeared, and he cursed again. Then Simon's figure appeared behind him again. But this time, Michael was ready. He turned sharply and finally fixed his gaze on the enemy, and his palm shone with a blinding azure light. Using the void-ripping finger, Michael launched an attack at almost point-blank range. However, Simon was quick enough to dodge to the side, the blue beam flashing past him. He crashed into the nearest tree, instantly cutting it in half. As the tree began to fall, Michael went into a frenzy and began to use the skill chaotically in all directions. Meanwhile, the hero was sincerely amazed by the power of this technique, and even wondered if this technique belonged to Class B. Michael told Simon that he had memorized his face, and if he dared to harm him, he would destroy his entire family. At that moment, something seemed to switch inside Simon. Without wasting a second, he rushed forward. The blonde continued to talk about how his uncle was one of the leaders of the martial arts master's base. However, before he could finish his threat, Simon suddenly appeared behind him and used Thunder Fist. The hero then declared that he liked the enemy's previous arrogant image much more. However, Michael made a fatal mistake when he decided to threaten his family. Simon's fist slammed into young Master Ye's face with tremendous force. The blow sent Michael flying through the forest back towards the cliff, and his opponent fell heavily to the ground, raising a cloud of dust and debris around him. As the dust began to settle, Simon slowly walked towards him, his expression and aura frightening. After this, the hero repeated again that Michael should not have used his family to make threats. Michael, bleeding profusely, couldn't believe what was happening. Since Simon wasn't even a master, the boy was so furious with Simon that he didn't even notice the giant jade black python looming over him. However, by the time he finally realized the danger and turned around, it was already too late. The next moment, the giant jade black python swallowed him whole in one swift movement. Meanwhile, Simon raised his spear and assumed a fighting stance, realizing that he had wasted too much time fighting that group. The three remaining opponents were extremely annoyed at being defeated so easily. The guy in the red jacket said that Simon was too weird. And then the hooded man asked where young Master Ye was. Suddenly, they noticed Simon rushing straight at them again and immediately prepared for another fight. However, Simon was not at all interested in fighting them. The hero continued to rush forward, and a giant python followed him. Simon jumped to the side. But besides the guy in the red jacket, the other two didn't have time to react and were swallowed up in one blow. After this, the python attacked the guy in the red jacket, who also did not manage to escape in time. However, at that moment, the python attacked Simon again, while he was thinking about the points he received for killing his opponents. Then the main character jumped again, dodging the blow of the tail, and then he quickly rushed through the trees. As he continued to run, the boy thought that it would be ideal to find a safe place to break through. And so, moving forward, he suddenly noticed a small cave. It turned out to be exactly the place he was hoping for. Seeing the cave, Simon immediately headed towards it, with the python still chasing him. Just as the monster was about to attack again, the hero dove straight inside. The python followed him and tried to squeeze through, but its huge body got stuck in the entrance. Now the monster could only roar furiously, while Simon calmly opened the system window. He checked his stats. His vitality was 96, while his combat value had reached 504. Then the guy immediately started pressing the system non-stop, urging it to work faster and faster. Focusing on his life force, the hero continued to distribute the points, feeling the energy spread throughout his body. Soon, the vitality indicator reached 100. Even the python felt that something frightening was happening. At that moment, a notification appeared, stating that Simon had made a breakthrough and become a first-rank master. He then clenched his fist, feeling the aura fill his entire body. After that, he looked at the python and noted that now it was his turn. The python felt real fear and tried to retreat, wanting to escape. However, Simon had no intention of giving him that opportunity. The hero gathered all his strength and delivered a powerful blow, since the python was trapped in the entrance of the cave and was unable to dodge in time. The hero's fist slammed into the monster, and all he could do was roar as he was thrown far into the air. The monster couldn't believe how strong Simon had become in such a short time. However, the guy didn't stop there. He formed another punch and used Diamond Fist again. He was so overcome with strength that blood began to flow from his mouth. But the hero had no intention of giving up. At that moment, he grabbed the tip of the monster's tail with his hand. Then the hero jumped onto the python's tail and used it as a support. He began to drive the monster into the ground with a series of continuous blows. Finally, Simon was ready to deliver the finishing blow. And to do so, he used the Thunder Fist skill. He struck so hard that it caused an explosion when his fist and the python's body collided. Of course, the monster could not survive such an attack. When the battle ended, clouds of dust and smoke rose up around. Simon was already standing on top of the giant python, his combat value having increased by another 92 units. Then he remembered that to receive a reward for hunting ferocious animals, it was usually necessary to cut off the left ear. However, the snakes had no ears, so he didn't know what to do. But he decided to forget about it and just get back as quickly as possible. When Simon began to leave, the forest had already become completely silent. Only traces of destruction remained everywhere, and all the previous chaos had disappeared. Continuing to move forward, the hero looked at the idiots who tried to attack him and ended up doing just that. Simon wondered if he could find the high-level combat technique that Michael used. Soon, the hero discovered something and realized that it was the void-tearing finger. He noted that this technique looked interesting. Then the guy decided to stay near the cave for a while longer. He made a fire and sat down next to the python's body. After this, Simon began to study the technique and noted that he had already memorized the introductory method for developing the void-tearing finger. Next, he planned to use the system to master this skill as quickly as possible. While the hero continued training, A clone soon appeared in front of him for sparring. The clone immediately began using the void-ripping finger again and again. During the fight with him, Simon's skill rapidly increased, reaching 51% and finally 93%. Soon after, the void-ripping finger entered the basic stage and began developing at 1%. But Simon was exhausted. As expected of a B-rank combat skill, even mastering it to the basic level put a huge strain on the body. 3 days later, Simon encountered a huge roaring monster, a giant bear. Using the void-rending finger, the hero fought it head-on and eventually defeated the beast. After the battle was over, the guy noted that he had finally reached a perfect level of mastery of the technique. Meanwhile, a huge crowd had already gathered at the martial arts base. One person remarked that Thunder's squad was incredibly ferocious to be able to destroy so many ferocious beasts. Another man noticed with surprise that among the prey, there was not a single beast without a rank. They all belonged to the first rank. Hearing this, Simon thought that perhaps he had killed too many beasts and attracted too much attention to himself. Now all he could do was hope that all this wouldn't cause him any extra problems. Meanwhile, people suddenly started shouting that the base was under attack and were surprised. They couldn't understand how something like this could even happen with so many high-level martial artists. Very soon, a pair of hands appeared from the ruins. And then the man himself appeared. It was Charlie, the base commander and Michael's uncle, who ordered the base to be completely locked down and not even a fly to be allowed to escape. After some time, another manager appeared and asked what had happened. Charlie reported that his nephew Michael and the 4 martial artists who accompanied him were dead. The crowd froze in shock. Someone remarked that it was deserved, since every person here had at least once become Michael's victim. Charlie announced that Michael's B-rank martial skill had disappeared from his body, and ordered all martial artists to be searched. He also stated that no one would leave the base until all suspicions were cleared. Simon thought that it was obvious from the bodies that the people had been killed by a python, so no one should connect what happened to it. However, as the search continued and more people were checked, the boy began to feel uneasy. He wondered if they were actually hunting him, especially when he noticed some people glancing in his direction. Suddenly, Charlie and his men headed straight towards Simon. He noted that he had heard that he had single-handedly obtained beasts worth over 400,000 credits and praised his abilities. However, a woman standing nearby assumed that the guy had picked up young Master Ye's bag and demanded a search. As soon as she said this, 2 strong men walked towards Simon, one of them warning that there was no point in resisting. However, the next moment, one of the men suddenly saw the tip of a spear pointed straight at his head. Charlie was shocked and realized that he hadn't even noticed the moment when Simon drew his spear. The protagonist then claimed to be a student at the first high school and asked if they were really going to search him. Hearing this, Charlie hesitated, remembering that the school principal was famous for being overly protective of his students. If the guy really killed all those animals on his own, then he was a real genius. Charlie explained that his nephew had been attacked and the family equipment had been stolen, so he had to find the culprit. In addition, the man offered the hero 10,000 credits as compensation for the search and asked if that amount would suit him. However, Simon immediately asked for 30,000, while reminding himself that Michael was killed by a giant python. After some thought, Charlie agreed to the terms, and the hero then spread his arms wide and allowed a search to be carried out. When the search was completed, the men reported that they had found nothing, and Charlie ordered that Simon be given the promised 30,000 credits. The protagonist noted that he had prepared well in advance. Otherwise, he would have had serious problems today. Leaving this place, Simon decided to go to the Association of Martial Arts Masters to undergo official certification. Later, already at the Master Base Hotel, Simon opened the system and noted that he had accumulated 534 combat value points. The hero came to the conclusion that he had been so busy in recent days that he had not even found time to use the points he had accumulated. Simon looked at all this and came to the conclusion that the first stage of the first rank required 100 units of vitality. At first, Simon began to improve his spirit. But after the improvement, the protagonist noted that he practically did not feel any difference. Then he began to increase the mortal body indicator, also adding 0.1 points. This time, the changes were immediate. After that, Simon decided that this was enough for the mortal body and directed 200 points into life force. As soon as he did this, an aura flared up around him, and the hero felt as if an endless source of power had awakened within him. After some time, his body gradually returned to normal. Then Simon breathed a sigh of relief, glad that he looked like his usual self again, because otherwise, it would have been difficult for him to explain it. An hour later, the protagonist arrived at the Star City Martial Arts Association. Approaching the registration desk, he announced that he had come to take the exam to obtain the status of a martial arts master. The employee explained that to obtain the title of first-rank master, the vitality had to be at least 100 units. Meanwhile, a man nearby noted that the guy came completely alone and did not even have a mentor nearby. However, the noise of the crowd soon attracted the attention of those around them. Someone announced that a young man named Parker, with a life force of 102 units, had failed the test. A little later, a new announcement was made that Lucas, with 105 units of vitality, had successfully passed the first stage. Lucas was then taken to a special apparatus for shocks. He immediately struck a powerful blow. The device showed a result of 1763, thanks to which the guy immediately passed the test. Someone in the audience asked if Lucas was a student of Charles from the Thunder Dojo. Hearing this, Simon couldn't help but wonder how many students this man had. Soon, an employee approached him and informed him that it was his turn to take the test. As the hero walked forward, Lucas thought that at that age, only true geniuses came to the exam. However, the very next moment the crowd exploded in shock. They could not believe such a high result. Lucas turned around as the staff member announced that Simon's life force was 123 and he had passed the test. The man tried to calm himself down, deciding that vitality meant nothing, since the main indicator remained combat power. Then the employee announced the start of the combat power test, and the hero was led to the striking apparatus. As he prepared to strike, Simon thought that he had already become a true martial arts master and had significantly improved his physique. At first, the guy decided that 40% of his power would be enough for the test, but then he decided to use 50%. When the hero struck, its power was truly terrifying. The device literally flew forward and crashed into the wall, after which it shattered into pieces. The destruction looked incredible, and all the people watching were frozen in complete shock. Simon sent the test apparatus flying with one blow, and such power looked truly terrifying. After that, another person reminded him that the standard combat power of a first-stage high-level master was only 3,000 units. Then someone exclaimed to one of the teachers that it was that same guy again, and called him a monster. In response, the teacher noted that now everything became clear. Meanwhile, Veronica, the head of the Star City Martial Arts Association, was in one of the offices. She complained irritably that the neighboring branch of Yan City had once again raised another genius and boasted about it every day. Suddenly, a man burst into her office and excitedly announced that a real monster had appeared at the exam. The man quickly explained that he was talking about a first-stage master whose combat power had reached 3,000 units. Meanwhile, in the central hall of the Martial Arts Association, an employee gave Simon the necessary information. He will first take him to the second floor to register his identity, and then help him receive the benefits he is entitled to. However, at that moment, Veronica unexpectedly appeared and announced that she would personally handle further matters. The man was surprised by the sudden appearance of the branch president. Veronica introduced herself as the president of the Star City Martial Arts Association branch and asked Simon to follow her. Simon agreed, although he was a little surprised that the president wanted to talk to him personally. Once in her office, the guy confirmed that he was indeed a student at Star City First High School. Then Veronica noticed that the director was trying to soften her heart, since the school had only graduated 2 ordinary masters that year. Simon then asked the reason why he had been brought to the president's office. Veronica asked him to relax. She had already instructed her subordinates to process his ID and monthly allowance. As for the techniques of instruction, the woman was going to teach him personally, and wanted to know how well Simon understood them. The hero replied that the instruction techniques were ways of absorbing this energy to strengthen one's own body. The woman explained that the information from the textbooks was only partially correct. For example, the heavenly flame technique that she herself practiced mainly absorbed the spiritual energy of the fire attribute. At the same time, it not only strengthened the body, but also endowed attacks with the destructive power of fire. Simon was amazed to learn that the guidance techniques could also be used in combat. Veronica explained that there were 7 attributes of spiritual energy: metal, wood, water, fire, earth, lightning, and wind. Although each of them had advantages, if we talk solely about destructive power, lightning took first place. Veronica took out a crystal to check compatibility. The more its surface glowed, the higher the compatibility. She herself had about 80%, but she was sure that a genius like Simon would probably show more than 90%. Veronica herself reached the 5th rank at a fairly young age and was considered an outstanding talent. However, to her complete shock, the crystals suddenly began to glow entirely, the fire attribute showing 100% compatibility. After this, the woman asked Simon if he understood the meaning of such a result. The guy admitted that he did not understand. She then explained that this meant the ability to absorb 100% of the spiritual energy of fire without the slightest loss. With 80% compatibility, some energy was lost, and even with this result, she managed to become a 5th rank master. As for Simon, his future achievements, in the woman's opinion, could be even higher. Simon decided that the fire attribute was a good option, but he still preferred lightning. At that moment, he wondered if he only had a fire attribute, and the crystals showed 100% compatibility with lightning. This literally left Veronica speechless. She no longer understood whether what was happening was reality. 100% compatibility with both fire and lightning seemed completely impossible. In her eyes, Simon looked like a real monster. But the shock didn't end there. To the woman's horror, it turned out that Simon's compatibility with the wind was also 100%. After a few more minutes, Veronica was so tired of being surprised that she practically lost her strength. She sincerely did not understand how this could even exist. All 7 of Simon's attributes were completely compatible. Previously, she considered herself a first-class genius, because a 5th rank master at the age of 30 was extremely rare. However, when confronted with a creature that went beyond common sense, she realized that she herself was just an ordinary person. Moreover, Veronica realized that only someone equally incredible could defeat someone who violated all the laws of logic, and Simon's existence went far beyond the understanding of ordinary people. Meanwhile, the hero once again clarified that all 7 of his attributes were indeed 100% compatible. Therefore, it seemed to him a great waste to develop only lightning and abandon the other 6 directions. Because of this, the guy was faced with a difficult choice. So he asked Veronica to provide him with techniques for all 7 attributes. However, the woman explained that the energy was limited, so it was better to focus on 1 or 2 directions at most. However, Simon replied that he could not make a decision yet, so he wanted to try to develop all directions first. Then the woman remembered that the monthly school inspection was due soon. Veronica explained that a major war between the human race and countless other races could begin at any moment. She said that she wanted to recommend Simon, but to do so, he needed to take first place in the exam. Simon experienced the effects of war firsthand, having lost all his relatives except his aunt and uncle 10 years ago. So the hero promised to work hard and vowed to never let his uncle and aunt go through such a tragedy again. For this, he had to become stronger. And with these thoughts, he went home. That same evening, Simon announced to his family that he had become an official martial arts master. Hearing this, they burst into tears of happiness, because thanks to his 10,000 yuan allowance, Uncle would no longer have to work himself to the point of exhaustion. The man agreed and noted that now Simon had become the support of their family, so he would listen to everything he said. The hero silently assured himself that he would not let them down. From now on, it was he who had to support this family. Late that night, Simon continued his cultivation. His eyes were shining and powerful energy was emanating from his body in waves. The guy then took a stance and punched the air. At the same moment, a small fire enveloped his fist. However, almost immediately it disappeared, turning into rising steam. The protagonist couldn't help but wonder whether this was considered the initial mastery of the conductor's technique. A new entry appeared in the Explorer's Techniques section of the system tray, so Simon knew he had finally looked into it. However, the technology level was equal to 1, which meant that it could be improved. Veronica didn't say anything about such levels. Therefore, the guy began to suspect that he was the only one who could improve them through the system. Simon was wondering how exactly to improve the conductor's techniques, and whether they worked on the same principle as battle points. When the hero touched the interface, a red warning about the lack of combat value flashed in front of him. Then the guy decided to first study the other techniques of the conductor, and only later figure out how to get new points. After several hours, 7 points of spiritual energy shone above the hero's body, each of them corresponding to a separate technique. Simon understood why the president said that even a genius who studied the 7 techniques could remain a first-rank master for decades. He soon noticed that although all 7 types of energy were present in his body, he could only use one at a time. Simon realized that if he tried to force the second attribute, the forces would collide and cause a massive explosion. And so it happened. A huge energy explosion shook the roof, and both attributes immediately disappeared. Simon narrowed his eyes. He didn't understand why thunder and fire couldn't combine. Their nature seemed similar to him. Then the hero tried again. Sparks of lightning and tongues of flame enveloped his fingers. However, at the moment of contact between the forces, another explosion occurred, which again dispersed the energy. All night long, bright flashes of light flared above the roof as Simon tried to connect the attributes. And by dawn, the building was still glowing with sparks. Breathing heavily, his face wet with sweat, the boy convinced himself that he was only just a little bit short. Lightning and flame flickered in his hand. He looked at them and continued to think that there was only one small step left to success. Simon then gritted his teeth and forced the powers to merge together. Lightning and fire enveloping his hands as he forcefully combined the energies. Finally, a bright flame burst into flames in the palm of his hand. After a whole night of attempts, the hero finally succeeded. Looking at the result with relief, the guy decided that it was time to test his new power in practice. Simon soon arrived at Star City's civilian battle plaza, a large area where training robots were stationed. The heroes stopped in front of the combat tester. He specifically chose a level 3 device, hoping that this time it would not break. Remembering that previously 50% of his strength had produced a result of 3,000 units, the guy decided to use 30% first. Then he struck with a glowing fist. The result exceeded the 2,343 mark. Simon was surprised. At 30% strength, the indicator should have been around 1,800. But it increased by another 500 units. After that, the guy clenched his fist again, took aim, and wondered how strong the combination of thunder and fire would be. He then released a combined force, his punch slamming into the tester with terrifying speed and power. The number 3041 appeared on the screen, and Simon froze in amazement. The result was significantly higher than expected. The boy realized that even 30% of his combined strength already surpassed the level of a late-stage first-rank master. If 2 elements gave such power, then he was afraid to imagine what his level would become after uniting all 7. Simon smiled and decided that next time he would definitely try to combine 3 attributes. Later, the guy was lying on the roof without a shirt, completely exhausted and covered in sweat. Combining 2 attributes proved difficult, but combining 3 seemed considerably more difficult. At that moment, the hero remembered that the exam was supposed to take place tomorrow, and he still had to earn new battle points. The next day, the students gathered at Star City High School No. 1. The director announced that from now on, a special genius training camp would be held every year to select talented fighters. The top 3 students who pass the exam will be eligible to join the Star City training camp. The students were shocked that even 7th-rank grandmasters were teaching there, since their headmaster was only a 3rd-rank master. However, now the hero did not understand what the difference was if the tickets still went to the 3 best students. Soon a friend approached him and informed him that Chris and Liam had already become masters, and had also mastered the Thunder Dash Fist. He explained that the director had assigned instructor Jonathan to conduct additional classes for them. At this point, Chris and Liam themselves stepped forward, the former declaring that he would show who the real genius was. Meanwhile, Jonathan asked if they had managed to find the genius who used the Thunder Rush Fist with 9 echoes. Principal Lee replied that he had been looking for him everywhere, but he didn't think he would be a student at their school. At that moment, a noise was heard from behind. Turning around, the men saw Charles with Lucas and Cruz, and he jokingly asked why the director looked so depressed. After the exam, he proposed to arrange a duel between the best students of the school and his students. The director immediately realized that Charles wanted to present his school in a bad light. Refusal would mean admitting a lack of talent. Charles added that he would understand perfectly well if he was refused, after which Jonathan sharply asked if he was looking for trouble. At that moment, Cruz noticed Simon in the crowd. At first, Charles did not understand who they were talking about. But when he saw the hero, he froze in shock. Now he realized that that little monster really did attend First High School. Looking at his students, the man realized that their defeat was almost inevitable. Therefore, he hastily declared that he was only joking and there would be no competition. Moreover, he called his students trash compared to local talent, and Cruz and Lucas immediately supported the mentor. However, Director Lee and Jonathan only became more angry, deciding that they were being openly bullied. Soon, the start of the 666th fight was announced, in which Simon was a participant. His friend noticed with alarm that his opponent was a quasi-martial arts master and shouted at the hero not to overexert himself. Chuck entered the arena and asked Simon if he would leave on his own or if he would prefer to be thrown out by force. He rushed forward, but Simon instantly disappeared from the spot and appeared right in front of him. With one blow, the hero sent the enemy flying. Chuck flipped in the air and landed heavily on the ground. Everyone around froze. The students could not understand when Simon had become so strong. The hero stood calmly among the settling dust, and everyone already realized that he had defeated the quasi-master with one blow. Many decided that the guy had already reached the first rank. And then everyone was told that the final battle would take place next. Jonathan looked at Simon in bewilderment, trying to understand where this student came from and why he didn't attend classes. Director Lee blamed himself for not noticing such talent earlier. Then their attention turned to the fight between Chris and Liam. Their forces were almost equal, so the outcome remained unpredictable. Liam warned that since both wielded the Thunder Dash fist with 3 echoes, the winner would be determined by the strongest move. Chris blocked the punch, and then his fist burst into flames. He stated that he was the real #1 in the school. The students immediately realized that Chris had mastered the external manifestation of the attribute. However, Liam only chuckled, his hand enveloped in a water-like energy. And then the spectators saw that he had also mastered the manifestation of an attribute. Moreover, his attribute turned out to be metal, superior to fire. Metal chains swirled around his fists, and Liam then lunged forward. His blows had already generated 5 echoes. Chris was shocked, but the next moment an explosion thundered. The blow sent him flying back, sending a shockwave through the arena. Director Lee and Jonathan were stunned, the former noting that Liam had been hiding his power all this time. After this, he stated that the finale had actually lost its intrigue, since Simon would not be able to resist Liam's metal attribute. Meanwhile, Charles bet 50,000 on Simon's victory, and upon hearing this, Director Lee decided that he had gone crazy. Finally, the final battle began. Liam and Simon met in the arena. The students loudly cheered for both. Liam stated that the hero was incredibly lucky to have made it to the final without having met either him or Chris before. However, Simon remained calm. After hunting ferocious beasts, most of the local students seemed too weak to him. Meanwhile, Liam chuckled and stated that Simon was only the second strongest. The hero calmly asked who was first then. In response, Liam confidently stated that of course he was the first one. The boy then immediately attacked, confident that one blow would be enough to show the huge difference between them. Seeing Liam immediately use Thunder Charge Fist with 5 echoes, the students thought it was all over for Simon. However, the protagonist's eyes flashed with golden light, and power began to rapidly accumulate within him. The next moment, his fist was engulfed in flames and he lunged forward, intending to test the limits of his own body. The crowd screamed in horror, thinking that Simon had gone mad for choosing to meet such an attack head-on instead of dodging. However, their fists collided with a deafening explosion that shook the earth. The opponents then continued to exchange blows, and waves of energy flew through the air in all directions. Liam was shocked when he realized that Simon had stopped his 5 echo fist with just 5 punches of his own. The fight continued, their fists clashing in a veritable storm of attacks, and energy chains whistled around them. Liam gritted his teeth. Each blow from Simon felt incredibly hard, as if he was dealing with an actual monster. In the stands, one of the teachers noted that Simon was an equal match for Liam, even without using martial arts. Jonathan suggested that Simon had a special physique, and Director Lee laughed, proud of himself for raising a genius. However, the instructor noted that despite Simon's strength, Liam's attributes still gave him a certain advantage. Another collision threw both fighters back. Liam was forced to retreat several meters. The boy became angry and declared that he would still win, and blue lightning flashed around his hands. He then rushed forward again, wrapping his fists in energy chains, intending to force Simon to admit defeat. The protagonist quickly realized that his opponent had finally stopped holding back and started using all his strength. So Simon decided to show respect to his opponent, his fist engulfed in flames again. After that, he rushed towards the attack. At that moment, blinding flashes of lightning flashed across the arena. Liam was shocked to realize that Simon also knew how to use the external manifestation of the attribute. Director Lee and Jonathan froze as lightning filled the arena. So shocked they were unable to speak. Simon's unique physique, combined with his lightning attribute, made him a truly terrifying opponent. Meanwhile, the fighters clashed again, causing lightning and energy chains to explode throughout the arena. Liam realized that Simon's lightning attribute was even stronger than his own metal attribute. Then the hero told his opponent that since he had already revealed his strongest move, he would respond accordingly. The boy then used his trump card and rushed forward using Thunder Charge Fist. His blow came down with devastating force, a series of blows thundering one after another, throwing Liam back. 9 consecutive echoing explosions echoed throughout the arena, and Liam shouted in shock that this was impossible. The next moment, blood gushed from his mouth and he collapsed to the ground. The students froze in absolute shock. And finally, someone asked if he had really won. Then the stands erupted in enthusiastic shouts. Everyone realized that Simon had reached a perfect level of technical mastery. Principal Lee stated that Simon was not just a genius, but a true dragon of Star City High School. Jonathan imagined how difficult it would be for other geniuses to face such a monster at training camp. The golden carp turned into a dragon when it encountered a favorable wind, and in his opinion, Star City was too small for such a person. Director Lee agreed with this opinion. He was sure that Simon would shine brightest either in the imperial capital. After that, Simon returned home, by which time his uncle had just finished cooking and immediately asked about the exam results. With a broad smile, the hero announced that he had won first place in the monthly exam. The uncle looked at him for a few seconds and then joyfully jumped to his feet. However, suddenly there was a loud knock on the door. A sharp female voice came from the corridor, asking if Simon lived here. The puzzled guy opened the door and his uncle and aunt were peering out cautiously behind him. A woman stood outside and introduced herself as Joseph's mother, explaining that only the top 3 students could get into the camp. Her son came in 4th, so she offered Simon to give up his place for 30,000 yuan. However, Simon and his family just looked at her silently. No one even reached for the money. Seeing that the money had no effect, the woman changed her tone and stated that the training camp was an extremely dangerous place. The richer disciples had high-quality pills and resources that Simon could not afford. These words made the aunt nervous. She quietly asked Simon if the camp was really that dangerous. Meanwhile, her uncle stroked her back soothingly. After this, he asked his nephew whether he could truly guarantee his safety. Simon assured his relatives that he could guarantee his own safety. Then his uncle declared that Simon was already grown up and that he would not trust a stranger more than his own family. After that, the door closed right in front of the woman. From the corridor, she shouted that all they could do was wait for the moment when Simon would be expelled from the camp. Simon then assured his family that everything was fine and that he could handle it. The uncle admitted that he was an ordinary person, but if Simon had the courage to take such a path, then the family would support him. Suddenly, the aunt slapped her husband on the back and told him to stop making a drama. She then noted that they weren't interested in ratings or fame. All they wanted was Simon's safety. Later that night, Simon stood alone on the rooftop and looked out at the city lights. And he knew his aunt and uncle were still worried about him. So the boy promised himself that he would not let them down. If he wanted to protect their new life, he needed to become even stronger. The hero then opened the system interface again and received 285 combat value points for the monthly exam. Reflecting on the powerful geniuses at the training camp, Simon decided that he needed to strengthen his body first. So he started putting points into the mortal body stat, and soon he was enveloped in a red glow, and the stat gradually increased. When the process stopped, steam rose from his body. The mortal body indicator reached 64.6%, but it was still far from 100%. The hero then wondered what kind of special physique would be revealed after the development was fully completed. And then he noticed something unexpected. The techniques had quietly risen to level 2, and the hero decided to immediately try to level them up again. Concentrating, the guy trained all night long. After a whole night of cultivation, Simon opened his eyes, fire and electricity faintly swirling around him. At this moment, a notification appeared stating that both techniques had successfully reached level 3. Later that morning, the hero stood outside a residential building with a gun slung over his shoulder, preparing to head off to training camp. His aunt looked at him with concern and said that he should take care of himself. If something went wrong, he could always return home. Uncle stood and trembled slightly, watching Simon leave, tears streaming down his cheeks. Then the aunt teased him, asking if he was as worried as she was. In response, the man admitted that he was indeed worried. He explained that he simply didn't want Simon to bear their fears as well. Meanwhile, the protagonist continued walking down the street when his senses detected some movement. Suddenly, a red sports car came around the corner and stopped abruptly next to him. The window slowly rolled down. Veronica was sitting behind the wheel wearing sunglasses. She told him to get inside. Soon they were speeding down the highway. Simon asked why she had come to pick him up personally. Without taking her eyes off the road, the woman explained that she wanted to give him some advice regarding the training camp. As the president of the association, she knew the other members well. Veronica said that some of the students were already high-stage first-rank masters and were close to second rank. Their combat techniques were at least B rank. The hero listened to her calmly. He knew that the second rank required 200 units of vitality, and this was a significant gap. However, the guy wasn't worried. Even if they had B rank techniques, his system allowed them to quickly master high-level skills. Veronica noted that although Simon's talent was the best she had ever seen, he still lacked resources. She added that even if he failed at camp, he should not despair, as it was only a matter of time before he surpassed them. Even after hearing about the differences with the participants, the guy remained calm, so she decided that there would be no problems. Sometime later, the black van was driving along the dangerous, winding road of the Tianlin mountain range. Liam and Chris were shocked to realize that the training camp was located in a place where ferocious animals gathered in packs. Simon knew that the Tianlin mountain range extended through several cities, including Star City and Yan City. There was extremely dense spiritual energy there, and ferocious beasts were found everywhere. Hidden within the depths of the mountains were beast kings comparable in strength to 7th-rank great masters. Therefore, ordinary 2nd-rank masters did not dare to enter there without serious preparation. As the van continued on its way deep in the forest, several pairs of glowing red eyes watched its progress closely. Meanwhile, Liam noticed that he had the feeling that someone was watching them. Simon knew that the competition at the training camp would be as brutal as the slaughter between the beasts themselves. Soon the van arrived at the fenced camp, where dozens of students had already gathered. After his exit, Chris wondered out loud how strong the other members could have been. This comment did not go unnoticed, and the crowd immediately turned its attention to the new arrivals. Unlike Simon, Liam and Chris were visibly nervous. The protagonist was the first to move forward, throwing his spear over his shoulder. He invited the others to move on, and the students obediently followed him. However, the officials stopped them. He said that they would have to wait for all the participants to arrive before the entrance examination could begin. After hearing about the test, Simon began watching the arriving vehicles. Soon, several luxury cars drove into the campgrounds. When the cars stopped, representatives of large families got out of them, and all attention instantly switched to them. There was Sally, the master of spiritual energy, Sawyer from the Lin family, and Evan, the son of the city ruler who was called the God of Barbarians. He had a special physique and an exceptionally high compatibility with the fire attribute. Simon studied them silently, wondering if they were the ones Veronica had spoken of as the most powerful geniuses. A weak smile appeared on his face as he wanted to see what they were really capable of. Finally, the curator stepped forward and announced the rules. He said the training camp was located 30 kilometers deep in the Tianlin mountain range. Some ferocious beasts carried special tokens inside their bodies, and only those who obtained such a token would be able to enter the camp. In addition, all participants were given 8 hours to reach their destination. Simon remained completely calm. In his opinion, 8 hours was more than enough to pass the test. Someone asked what would happen if a participant encountered a strong beast, and the curator replied that then he should consider himself a failure. These words immediately sparked a wave of discontent, with some students claiming the rules were unfair. However, the curator reminded them that the real world was not a game. On the battlefield, a stronger expert could kill them in an instant. Suppressing the weak and winning through sheer numbers were a common reality on the battlefield. At this point, One student mockingly declared that the protesters were trash and should have left as soon as possible. The angry participant pointed his finger at him and demanded that he repeat what he had said. The official then said that violence was prohibited inside the camp. But once they entered the mountains, no one was going to interfere in their conflicts. The two hostile students continued to glare at each other. Simon concluded that the camp was deliberately designed to encourage participants to fight. Then a thought occurred to him that fighting these students could bring him a lot of combat value. Meanwhile, the official glanced at the timer, after which he announced the start of the test and ordered everyone to move forward. The students immediately rushed forward and soon disappeared into the dense forest of the Tianlin mountain range. Near the entrance to the forest, the confrontation between the guy in the suit and his opponent finally escalated into a fight. The student in the suit mockingly stated that the opponent could have come closer if he really wanted to be eliminated from the test. He, burning with rage, replied that he would definitely fulfill his wish, after which he rushed forward with a fist engulfed in flames. However, the guy in the suit met the attack with a blow enveloped in cold blue energy. The two forces collided, causing a powerful explosion of light and wind that swept across the area. Then, a rapid exchange of blows began between them. High above them, standing on a thick tree branch, Simon watched the fight silently. Initially, he wanted to see with his own eyes the power of the so-called geniuses. But what he saw disappointed him, so he was already getting ready to leave and go hunting for stronger animals. Below, the guy in the suit continued to taunt his opponent, declaring that a poor man will always remain a poor man. He wondered what years of hard training could achieve compared to the wealth accumulated by the family over many generations. These words made Simon stop. He decided that he would not let such free combat value go to waste. He jumped from the tree and landed in front of the two fighters, after which he suggested that they stop fighting. Simon suggested fighting him instead of fighting each other. The guy in the suit immediately irritably called him another poor man and warned that he would also end up getting beaten up. Then the hero explained that they had misunderstood him. He meant for them to stop fighting and unite against him. The first participant immediately became enraged and rushed at Simon, believing that he was being openly mocked. However, the main character raised his leg. He quickly moved to the side and delivered a knee strike directly into his opponent's stomach. The young man cried out in pain. Then he was literally thrown across a small clearing like a bullet and crashed into a tree with a roar. His suited opponent watched this in complete stupor, unable to understand how this was even possible. He turned to Simon and immediately noticed his impressive footwork. The hero's movements were incredibly fast. Once the wooden club was right in front of his face, it was no longer possible to dodge. That's why he too was knocked out with one crushing blow of the bat. After that, he collapsed to the ground. Simon noted that this was exactly how it ended for those who looked down on ordinary cultivators. Meanwhile, in the observation room, staff monitored what was happening through a huge digital screen. The leader explained that none of the victims had yet requested rescue, meaning their ordeal was still ongoing. Meanwhile, in the forest, the cultivator in the suit slowly came to his senses. Holding his aching face, he noticed a second fighter nearby. At that very second, the guy quickly crawled back and demanded that they stay away. He then looked in the direction Simon had gone and cursed, declaring that he would definitely take revenge on him in the future. The other fighter also soon rose to his feet. He stated that he lost only because he underestimated his opponent. For some time, the former rivals sat silently opposite each other. And eventually, the short-haired participant spoke first. He apologized for his earlier words and admitted that the second fighter was actually quite strong. And the guy in the suit responded in kind. Soon the two were standing with their arms around each other's shoulders, calling themselves brothers. And then they quickly came up with a plan for revenge. Meanwhile, Simon was racing through the forest at high speed. However, suddenly he stopped. A group of giant boars of the initial stage of the first rank burst out from the bushes towards him. Seeing them again, the hero wondered how many such creatures he had already encountered in the Tianlin mountain range. The boars immediately rushed at him with a furious roar. Simon's eyes flashed with golden light. Then he used Thunder Dash Fist. 9 resonances released yellow lightning bolts that rushed forward, the attack cutting through the entire group in a golden blast of energy. When the dust settled, system messages appeared around him, indicating that he had gained 32 combat value points. The protagonist thought that the rewards became smaller as his strength grew. However, He just shrugged and decided that the real target remained the tokens. He then began to open up the boar carcasses, remembering that the dozen animals he had killed earlier had also been missing tags. Simon was convinced that there were none among these monsters either, and he came to the conclusion that only stronger beasts wore tokens. Half an hour later, Simon moved deeper into the forest, jumping from tree to tree and surveying the area. When he first entered the 5-kilometer zone, he found more than a dozen animals every hour. But now there was not a single one in sight. It was at this moment that a huge, late-stage, first-rank black tiger suddenly leaped forward with a loud roar. The hero quickly dodged the attack and immediately recognized the beast. Blue energy gathered around his finger as Simon used Void-Ripping Finger. The blow hit the tiger straight. The beast roared in pain from such a strong blow. The incredible force of the attack slammed him into the ground, cracking the soil beneath him. To end the fight, the boy thrust his spear straight into the tiger's head. Immediately after this, a message appeared about receiving 35 combat value points. Simon noted to himself that with his current strength, defeating a late-stage rank 1 beast was incredibly easy. He then searched the tiger's stomach and finally pulled out a bloody token. Looking at it, the hero noticed that he had spent almost 3 hours just looking for one such item. Weak boars were found everywhere, while late-stage animals like this tiger were extremely rare. Stronger monsters brought more value, but there were significantly fewer of them. After some thought, Simon decided that quantity was better than quality, as he would be able to gain combat value faster. Since there were still 5 hours left before the end of the test, the protagonist set off on his journey again. His plan was simple: push his mortal body to its limits before time ran out. Leaving behind a clearing filled with blood and animal carcasses, the guy continued on his way. However, suddenly a huge bear with a deafening roar rushed forward and rushed straight towards Simon. The hero noted that after battling dozens of first-rank beasts, he finally met a mid-stage first-rank opponent. Bright orange flames began to gather around his fist as he prepared to counterattack. The hero jumped high and thrust his flaming fist straight into the bear's open mouth. Fire and impact force erupted simultaneously, causing irreparable damage to the beast. In the reflection of the beast's eye, Simon could be seen lowering himself again for the finishing blow. Then he fell upon the enemy with all his mass. The impact shook the ground violently, and a few moments later, the huge body stopped moving. Simon noted that since his mortal body stat had reached 60%, defeating a mid-stage beast had become possible. Looking at the remaining time, the hero saw that there were more than 3 hours left until the end of the test. It was at that moment that several peals of thunder suddenly rolled through the forest. Simon immediately looked up to the sky and wondered what that sound was. After observing for a while, Simon guessed that it might be the legendary Beast King, Golden Rock. The giant bird let out a piercing cry, and the powerful flapping of its wings created a huge shockwave that rolled through the forest. Simon thrust his spear into the ground and gripped it tightly to maintain his balance against this monstrous force. Suddenly, there was a loud crack as the huge tree split in half. Unable to withstand the enormous pressure, Simon jumped onto a piece of rock, trying to stay in place, wondering what kind of animal could have caused this. Faced with such overwhelming power, the hero realized that he was nothing more than an ant in front of the true experts. Then his eyes suddenly widened as he spotted another figure approaching high in the sky. The Beast King hovered in the air, and a second figure, also glowing with golden light, was approaching him. It was Grandmaster Joshua of the 7th rank, who announced that he was temporarily using this territory. In response, Golden Rock swooped down, claws outstretched, and declared that he had never agreed to lend his territory. Then Joshua rushed forward. He declared that he would beat the Beast King until he agreed. Afterwards, the two forces collided in midair, Golden Doom's wings flashing with golden light as it turned around. Streams of light swirled around him, and then a powerful shockwave threw Joshua back. He quickly regained his balance, clearly irritated by what was happening, after which he rushed into the attack again. Explosions of golden power rained down upon the beast one after another, lighting up the sky as they fought fiercely in the air. Soon, Joshua's fist slammed into the Beast King's head, causing blood and feathers to fly everywhere. Joshua stated that he was only borrowing the territory, and ordered the beast to leave and not force it to repeat what it had said. In response, the Beast King screamed furiously and began to retreat, indicating that Joshua still had to wait. However, The man only waved his hand dismissively and told him to get lost. Then his voice echoed throughout the area. He announced that he was a 7th-rank grandmaster and told the disciples not to panic as the test would continue. The hero wondered if this was really what the true power of a 7th-rank martial artist looked like. Gritting his teeth, he became determined and promised himself that one day he would definitely reach such a level. Meanwhile, high in the sky, Joshua began to descend towards the base, below which was an area resembling a huge crater. He complained that the beast could have simply agreed. He only wanted to use this territory to test the students. 5th-rank masters Orlando and Bella noted with admiration that Grandmaster Chin was even more terrifying than the rumors said. Joshua ordered everyone to go to the observation room. He wanted to see which students could withstand the pressure of the golden rock. Inside the observation room, monitors showed the participants collapsing to the ground under the impact of the shockwave. However, Joshua noticed a student standing next to the dead black tigers, remaining calm under the pressure of the beast. Bella revealed that it was Evan, who had the physique of a barbarian god and was the son of the city ruler of Star City. Soon, another participant appeared on the screen. Bella announced that it was Sawyer, a late-stage 1st-rank master. The recording then showed a girl who was protecting herself with a barrier. Her name was Sally. She was a mid-stage telekinetic of the 1st rank. Joshua asked if there were any other worthy talents. Then Bella began listing other names from the Lin and Wang families. However, she soon hesitated, realizing that all the best results belonged to representatives of famous families of Star City. Hearing this, Joshua declared that he would not look any further, as First High School clearly did not deserve its reputation. However, at that moment, Orlando suddenly cried out in surprise and pointed at one of the screens. On the monitor was Simon, who was killing the beast. They were shocked that the guy retained his strength after the pressure of the Golden Doom. Bella trembled and stuttered as she said that it was the same monster from Star City First High School. Orlando immediately pulled her up and told her not to make a fuss in front of the Grandmaster. Then Orlando himself looked at the report, after which even he began to tremble and repeated that it was a real monster. Joshua looked at them and reminded them that 2 5th-rank masters should have seen quite a few geniuses. However, once he read the report himself, his eyes also widened in shock. According to the report, Simon was 18 years old and in the initial stages of rank 1, with a strength rating of 123. Joshua realized that this was not a talent that was born once in a century, but a rarity that appeared once in 1,000 years. Very quickly, his shock turned to delight. The Grandmaster joyfully declared that he had hit the jackpot. However, he demanded to know why such a talented young man was still at the initial stage of the 1st rank. Bella quickly explained that Simon had cultivated all 7 guiding techniques simultaneously. At this point, one of the staff members reported that participants had already begun arriving at the camp. Outside, the first 3 students had already greeted him. Joshua praised all 3, noting that they had done very well. Meanwhile, 6 hours had already passed since the start of the test, and more students were staggering towards the camp. 7.5 hours later, more students had gathered, and several of the arriving interns declared that there was no one left. However, Grandmaster Joshua wondered where Simon was. He was worried that the genius he had found had gotten lost. After a few minutes, Joshua finally noticed a figure coming out of the forest. He sighed with relief, deciding that the boy had made it in time. Simon muttered that he had made it just in time, as he had been so caught up in earning combat value that he had almost forgotten about the deadline. When the hero entered the camp, the other students stared at him in shock. One quietly said that Simon was ruthless. The 2 men Simon had previously humiliated glared at him, one declaring that he had been waiting for him for a long time. But the other stopped his comrade. Nearby, 3 students were also watching Simon, one calling him a master for passing the test at the last moment. As the sun began to set, the instructor stepped forward and announced that the 8-hour limit was over. He then announced that all those absent had been expelled, after which he began to talk about the camp's facilities and its rules. He then pointed to the martial arts pavilion, where students could exchange contribution points for martial techniques, pills, and weapons. Hearing this, Simon thought that the decision to come here was the right one. The instructor then explained the rules. All structures required contribution points to use. They could only be obtained for successfully completing training sessions, and the best results brought additional rewards. After this, he said that those who still had strength could begin training, and the wounded should go to the dormitory to rest. Simon entered his room and found that it was a single room. Then he realized that he could now cultivate in peace. Later, the hero sat on the bed, crossed his legs, and opened the system interface, displaying his characteristics on the screen. Simon decided to spend all his points on upgrading his mortal body, and red energy flared up around him. Finally, the system reported that the mortal body had reached 100% and had begun to evolve. Simon's physical evolution began immediately, red energy enveloping his body and glowing nodes appearing throughout it. The boy meditated on the floor of the room while a powerful vortex of spiritual energy swirled around him. When the process was complete, he let out a sigh of relief and steam rose from his body. Looking at himself, Simon was amazed at the enormous strength his body now possessed. Then the system interface appeared and announced that the hero had unlocked the Overlord's body, the strongest physical body in the world. Simon wondered what it could evolve into, and deciding to test the limits of the new body, he took the jacket and spear. However, as soon as he squeezed the shaft, the metal crunched and cracked under his hand. The hero realized that now ordinary force was enough to break the extremely durable C-rank alloy. For a moment he panicked, thinking that spears of that rank were very expensive and he had just wasted a fortune. Luckily, Simon then remembered that he had picked up the spear for free in the wasteland. Leaving the room, the hero wondered whether he could easily earn the necessary points by training in a vest weighing several hundred kilograms. Meanwhile, in the camp warehouse, a crowd of students had gathered around Evan, all amazed by his monstrous strength. They noted that an ordinary first-level martial artist would only be able to withstand a fraction of that amount of stress. Sally and Sawyer watched the proceedings and praised Evan's barbarian body. Meanwhile, Bella asked what they should do about the hero cultivating 7 direction techniques at the same time. Realizing that pressuring such a proud genius would backfire, Joshua decided to let him realize his mistake on his own. Afterwards, he asked instructor Orlando how the preparations for the secret night attack on the students were progressing. He chuckled, waiting for the reaction of the interns who had mistakenly thought that after the entrance exam they would be able to rest peacefully. To carry out his plan, Joshua ordered him to send a strong, first-level, high-stage master against Simon. After that, he was going to personally explain to him the impossibility of such a method of cultivation and force the hero to abandon it. The staff expressed concern that an enemy with a life force of over 400 units could finally break Simon's spirit. However, Joshua replied that if the guy's resolve could crumble so easily, then he was nothing but trash. Meanwhile, outside the camp, Simon heard the other students rushing into the high-gravity room. Preferring to avoid the crowd, Simon headed to the now empty equipment warehouse, deciding to find out the reason for the commotion later. There he received a smart bracelet for counting points, and was convinced that it was with its help that the deposit points were calculated. While inspecting the warehouse, the hero walked past the equipment and stopped near the super heavy alloy vests, each weighing 10 tons. Curious about his limits, he tried one on. However, he quickly realized that this weight was too restrictive for his speed and endurance. He then replaced it with a vest weighing 5 tons. After this, Simon began to move quickly around the warehouse, testing his mobility. After completing the test, he concluded that the 5-ton load was ideal for his physical condition. Then the hero thought about his future rivals. He became interested in how much weight Evan and the other strongest geniuses of the camp carried. He also hoped to learn something from observing their development methods. So he left the warehouse and headed towards them. Outside the gravity chamber, participants were discussing how Evan had entered without even taking off his 3-ton vest. One of the monitors showed Evan training under double gravity. Simon was surprised to learn that Evan's base vest weighed only 3 tons, which seemed quite light to him. Simon soon approached his former classmates, Chris and Liam, and asked why they hadn't gone to practice. The guys admitted that they had no intention of going there, since only humiliation awaited them there. The opponents were too strong. However, Simon decided to go inside, and the other students were surprised to see that the hero was heading to the gravity room. They decided he was nuts. Some even suggested he wasn't wearing a weight vest under his jacket at all. While everyone continued to mock him, Simon silently walked inside. Gravity rooms were extremely expensive and were usually only available to noble families. Since he had the chance to use one for free, the guy wasn't going to pass it up. He was wearing a 5-ton vest, and with double gravity, the load would have reached 10 tons. So the hero set the coefficient to 1.5. Even with this load, it became so difficult for him that he could barely stay on his feet. The other students laughed at him, saying that he didn't even wear a vest, but he still set the gravity to 1.5 times. However, Simon simply sat down and began to cultivate his technique under tremendous pressure. After 2 hours, he managed to increase all characteristics except thunder and flame. In addition, his vitality increased from 126 to 130 units. The hero was satisfied with the result. He realized that the other training rooms could also be useful. Since even the gravity room had already given him points, Simon then headed towards the exit of the gravity room. When he finally came out, the watching students began to mock him again, saying that the last place had finally come out. At that moment, the guy took off his jacket because he became too hot. Only then did the two scoffers notice that he was indeed wearing a weighted vest. However, they still decided that he was a weakling because there was no marking on the vest, meaning that his weight did not exceed 500 kilograms. Some suggested that Simon was still quite strong, but were sure that he was still a long way from Evan. Soon Evan came out of the gravity room and the students immediately surrounded him. Evan walked outside, breathing heavily, while those around him vied with each other in praising his strength, calling it the best in the entire camp. He then unbuttoned his vest and threw it on the ground, causing the ground to shake from the impact, which greatly frightened the students standing nearby. With the enormous load off his shoulder, Evan began massaging his aching shoulder and admitted that the weight had been exhausting. Sawyer approached Evan and asked him to compete, but Evan immediately refused, as it would be stupid to compete with him in speed. Hearing their conversation, Simon immediately became interested in the mention of an A-rank movement technique. The hero realized that despite the immense power of his overlord body, he still lacked high-level mobility skills. Following the crowd, Simon arrived at the domed hall for training movement techniques. The students watched the monitors, noting that Sawyer had set the simulation to its highest difficulty level. On the screen, the young man moved with blinding speed, effortlessly slipping through a dense barrage of flying arrows. Moreover, he even closed his eyes, continuing to dodge the projectiles and somehow causing the rose petals to fall. Watching the spectacular performance, the protagonist noted the quality of this technique, and then a system window appeared in front of him. It stated that one observation was enough to copy the soaring swan step. Simon then stepped forward to test the technique himself. This immediately attracted the attention of those around him, and the crowd immediately began to laugh and mock him. They found it ridiculous that someone could master a complex A-rank technique just by looking at it once. However, the hero ignored the ridicule, his consciousness immersed in the system's virtual training space. Through intensive practice, his technical proficiency level increased from 8% to 93%. Soon, the system congratulated him on reaching the basic level of the technique, and Simon was extremely pleased. As the system was about to return him to reality, the boy thought that using Sawyer's movements as a reference was awkward. After making sure that he no longer needed the Hall of Movement Techniques, Simon decided to head to the Hall of Fierce Beasts. However, his thoughts were suddenly interrupted when he noticed that the entire crowd was staring at him and taking pictures with their phones. To his horror, the protagonist realized that while he was training inside the system, his real body was repeating all these movements. Greatly embarrassed, Simon left the place at full speed, ignoring the crowd who wanted to see it again. As the boy ran away, his heightened senses detected surveillance. He was followed by a student in a suit, as well as the guy Simon had defeated during the entrance test. Upon reaching the large complex known as the Hall of Fierce Beasts, Simon noticed a large crowd at the entrance. Evan laughed and noted that Sally wanted to compete with him in a beast hunt to determine the strongest student at camp. Sensing the disdain in his words, Sally countered by saying that it was he who underestimated the power of the spiritual master. Intrigued by the mention of a spiritual master, Simon decided to first observe her abilities. Looking through the observation window, the hero was completely amazed by what he saw. Sally gracefully descended from the sky straight towards a pack of black tigers. Simon marveled at the sight, knowing that walking on air was usually only possible for grandmasters. With one simple movement of her glowing hand, Sally activated her power. At that moment, several blinding golden rays rushed forward and simultaneously pierced the skulls of 3 tigers. Suddenly, a huge beast shrouded in a red aura let out a furious roar and tried to attack Sally from behind. However, the monster instantly froze in place, and his eyes widened in shock. The girl used spiritual telekinesis, forcibly lifting the giant creature into the air and completely immobilizing it. Then, with a quick wave of her hand, Sally sent the golden light forward, and it pierced the beast's head cleanly, killing it instantly. Watching the battle closely, the hero finally realized that the deadly streaks of light were actually daggers. The ability of spiritual masters to telekinetically control weapons from a distance made them incredibly powerful. The crowd of students continued to watch the monitor in bewilderment when someone saw a giant weapon on the screen. Sally stood before the massive snake beast and effortlessly summoned a massive glowing golden sword out of nowhere. Then the girl lowered her hand down. After this, the huge blade fell on the target and with one blow cut the giant snake in half. Simon noted that Sally had never carried a weapon before, and a sword of that size must have weighed several tons. Meanwhile, Sawyer approached the group and explained that the giant sword was an advanced A-rank combat skill. Hearing this, the crowd was once again astonished by the appearance of another A-rank skill. Sawyer also confirmed that Evan did indeed possess an extremely destructive A-rank offensive martial art. A smile appeared on the hero's face, as the camp was overflowing with elite A-rank skills that his system could copy. The students continued to watch the monitor, where Evan destroyed a first-class ferocious beast with one blow. With nothing to copy, Simon turned away, deciding to find another opportunity to learn from him later. Then blue energy gathered in his hand, and the guy himself decided to organize a large-scale monster hunt for points. Meanwhile, the student in the suit and his burly companion were still secretly following him. They noticed Simon enter one of the testing arenas and concluded that no one would interfere. However, just as they were preparing for an ambush, one of them suddenly screamed. He then pointed up to the large surveillance monitor mounted above the entrance to the complex. Simon stood in the arena, surrounded by a huge red-eyed bear and giant armored scorpions. They realized that the boy had challenged more than 10 first high-rank ferocious beasts at the same time. They panicked and even started to think about calling the instructor to save Simon. Meanwhile, Simon deliberately provoked the monsters, causing them to attack simultaneously. His provocation worked, and the monsters immediately rushed at him, growling furiously. The hero then jumped back, dodging the first blow. After this, he rushed forward himself. His blows were so powerful that the monster's insides literally burst from the force of the hits. The two guys watching this were speechless. Soon, one of them noticed a familiar movement technique that Simon was using. Then it dawned on him that the main character had already managed to copy Sawyer's technique and was now freely using it in battle. This caused an argument between them, as both believed such a thing was impossible. However, after some time, they were forced to admit that Simon had managed to master the technique almost immediately after observation. Then one of them immediately suggested forgetting about revenge, and the second did not even object. However, a moment later, the other guy wanted to reconsider his decision again. In response, his comrade simply pointed to what was happening inside the training hall. They looked back at the arena and saw that Simon had destroyed all the beasts in just a few minutes. At that moment, an awkward silence fell between the guys. At this time, the hero himself was checking the number of points received for defeating such strong opponents. The reward wasn't very big because the stronger he became, the harder it was to accumulate points. However, he was never able to rest. Not even a minute had passed before new monsters began to emerge from their hiding places. So Simon instantly rose to his feet, ready to continue the fight. The next moment, a huge beast rushed down from above, but the guy didn't even flinch. Using Diamond Fist, Simon stepped forward and delivered a powerful blow that collided with the attacking monster. A golden flash exploded in all directions, striking several beasts at once. The hero then landed right among them, and the golden energy around his body began to rapidly expand. Seeing such power, the remaining monsters hesitated, and soon the monsters began to retreat. However, Simon had no intention of letting them escape, and he then rushed forward, determined to take all the combat value. His body flew through the air at incredible speed. Then he stretched out his hand and grabbed the tail of the fleeing scorpion. After this, Simon spun the monster with great force. The creature crashed into the rest of the animals, scattering their bodies. Outside, two observers watched what was happening with horror and were unable to utter a word for a long time. Finally, one of them decided that he had forgiven Simon. The second immediately agreed and suggested that they disappear as quickly as possible. At that moment, someone noticed the two guys and asked if they had returned yet. Then they were asked if they had managed to take revenge. They looked at each other nervously. One of them awkwardly scratched the back of his head and with a forced laugh confirmed that everything had worked out. However, they both understood perfectly well that if they had not retreated in time, They would now be lying on the ground like dead dogs. Meanwhile, the massive doors of the training ground opened and Evan and Sally came out. Evan looked at the display on his wrist and reported that he had scored 280 points. Then Sally said that she had scored 270 points. Hearing this, the people around immediately raised a fuss. According to their calculations, it turned out that these two had destroyed at least 60 animals. Afterwards, Evan checked his vest training results and reported that he had been awarded another 100 contribution points for it. The other students also started checking their results, and it turned out that the highest score among them was only 30 points. Soon, Sawyer asked Evan and Sally who won their ferocious animal hunting competition. Hearing these conversations, the two guys who'd already seen Simon's strength just chuckled. Meanwhile, in Simon's room, an hour later, the battlefield had turned into a truly terrifying sight. The walls and surrounding area were spattered with blood, and the bodies of ferocious beasts lay in heaps all over the area. On top of this mountain of corpses sat Simon. The hero exhaled tiredly and took a deep breath. After more than an hour of continuous hunting, even his overlord body began to feel the strain. Despite his fatigue, he managed to earn 700 contribution points, and he began to think about what rewards he could exchange them for. Simon soon arrived at the martial arts pavilion. Inside, a female employee in a pink suit sat lazily behind a wooden counter. Simon leafed through the thick catalog, his gaze carefully scanning the list of products. Looking at these figures, Simon came to the conclusion that A-rank martial arts were extremely expensive. The employee looked at him with slight displeasure and asked if he had already decided what he wanted to exchange. Simon asked if spirit-gathering pills were the kind that increased spiritual power, and the employee confirmed this. The hero looked at the catalog again and saw that the highest quality spirit-gathering pill available cost 500 contribution points. After a brief silence, Simon made a decision and asked for a 4th-rank spirit-gathering pill. Hearing this, the employee froze. Her eyes widened in surprise, and she clarified that a 4th-rank pill cost 500 points. The girl then quickly checked his balance. The number 700 was clearly displayed on the screen. The employee was shocked to see this. Her attitude towards the hero instantly changed. With a wide smile, she carefully took out the box and politely handed it to Simon. After that, she warmly thanked him for the purchase and called the hero a handsome man. When it was late evening, Simon was returning to his room. There, a new weapon was already waiting for him. A C-rank spear with dual lightning and fire attributes called Thunderflame. The improvements he made in just one day far exceeded anything he had managed to achieve in the previous week. However, after careful calculations, Simon realized that his spiritual power was still only 25.5 units. The hero then picked up the pill and examined it carefully, hoping that it could increase his spiritual power by 25 units. The boy then swallowed the pill, thinking that he would definitely become a spiritual master. The next moment, the 4th-rank spirit-gathering pill dissolved within his body. Spiritual power began to spread in all directions, and shining streams of energy rushed along his meridians. The energy swirled continuously, filling his entire being with warmth. Simon felt his nerves gradually relax. As the energy continued to circulate, the hero's consciousness became clearer, and his senses became more acute. Spiritual energy gradually settled inside him, strengthening both his body and mind. And finally, the boy slowly opened his eyes. His eyes widened in surprise when he saw that his spiritual power had risen to 50.5 units, an increase of 24 points. With a spiritual strength of 50.5 and a combat value reserve of 490, his progress reached 99.5%. And he was 0.5% short of a breakthrough. After thinking about it, Simon came to the conclusion that if he had known about this in advance, he would have simply killed another ferocious beast. Meanwhile, in the training camp warehouse, rows of hunters gathered in a spacious hall. And then suddenly a group of men noticed a familiar person. One of them asked why Bob, who was studying at the university, was now here. Another asked why Bob did the same work as everyone else. Despite his status among the geniuses, Bob simply stated that if he were still in school, the so-called geniuses would not even be worthy of becoming his sparring partners. Several hunters laughed loudly, one of them noticing that his student Evan had a life force of 340 units. Another man proudly stated that his protege also had a life force of over 300 units. Hearing this, Bob wondered why their students were so strong. while his student only had a score of 123. He asked if Joshua had made a mistake by ordering a first-rank initial stage fighter to attack the same opponent. At that moment, Joshua entered the room and confirmed that everything had been organized correctly. Joshua explained that Simon was not as simple as he seemed. His power could rival that of a high-stage master. Hearing this, the surrounding hunters were shocked. The Grand Master then stated that some of the information about Simon was classified, and therefore was not included in the reports he issued. After this, the man lightly hit Bob on the head and reminded him that he should have fought with all his strength. Upon hearing this, Bob warned that if he accidentally injured Simon during the fight, he was not going to take responsibility. Joshua replied that Bob had to defeat Simon if he crippled him, for which he would receive a reward. The Grand Master then ordered everyone to begin the operation immediately, and the next moment, all the hunters rushed forward at incredible speed. Then the events moved to the training city. The calm atmosphere was suddenly shattered when the hunters went on the offensive. Alarmed voices were immediately heard from inside, someone demanding to know who they were, and another claiming that it was an attack. Awakened by the noise, Simon jumped up in bed, realizing that they had been suddenly attacked. The very next second, the main character turned his gaze to the door of his room. Suddenly, deep cuts appeared on its surface. Bob burst through and jumped into the room, clutching a weapon shrouded in a purple aura. After that, he delivered a powerful blow. The floor shattered into pieces from the impact, and purple energy exploded around. The hero had to jump back to avoid the blow. Quickly regaining his balance, Simon immediately assessed the situation. Then a rumor popped into his head that the 10,000 Races sect regularly hunted human geniuses. Without a second's hesitation, he grabbed his spear and prepared for battle. The next moment, Bob jumped towards Simon. He declared that in front of him was just a first-level brat. Simon was surprised to see that the attacker was a first-level master, and not a representative of the 10,000 Races. A confident smile appeared on the hero's face. This opponent was exactly what he needed. Simon was confident that by defeating this enemy, he could obtain the last 5 combat value points needed to break through. Meanwhile, Bob couldn't understand why the first-level master of the initial level decided to meet his attack head-on. The next moment, their weapons collided with explosive force, and shockwaves spread through the air. Bob's eyes widened as he was thrown back, shocked by the sheer force of the blow. Bob had to admit that Simon's fighting power could indeed rival that of a high-level master. Simon remained completely calm, noting that his opponent was only a high-level first-stage master. The boy then gripped his weapon tighter and directed the surrounding energy forward, a crimson aura erupting from his body. With a furious cry, Simon unleashed his power and slammed the attack down, sending shockwaves across the battlefield from the impact. Bob trembled as he gripped the sword, reeling under the crushing force. Then, he decided not to hold back any longer, and his blade became covered in purple flames. He regained his stance and declared that the battle between the masters was not only a comparison of physical strength. Simon immediately realized that this was a fire attribute technique that he had never encountered before. Therefore, the hero activated his own lightning attribute martial arts techniques without hesitation. Bob also released his power, the purple flame forming a red-hot arc that cut through the air. He then used the flame slash technique, sending a huge wave of blazing energy towards the enemy. But Simon remained calm, lightning crackling around his body as he raised his spear and gathered energy. Purple flames and golden lightning collided with each other, releasing a blinding explosion of energy. The blow exploded with devastating force, sending shockwaves in all directions and splitting the ground beneath the opponent's feet. Amid the swirling dust, Simon sank to the ground. Stopping right in front of Bob, the hero held his spear tightly, his expression calm. Bob realized that Simon had blocked his B-rank fire martial arts solely by materializing lightning. He then mockingly remarked that it was truly a pity that Simon didn't know the lightning attribute spear techniques yet. Hearing this, Simon smiled. He admitted that the lightning attribute spear technician really didn't know. However, the next moment, flames suddenly burst out of his spear, and lightning began to wrap around the shaft, gradually merging with the fire. Bob looked at this with disbelief until the fire engulfed the entire protagonist. His eyes widened in shock as he realized that what was happening in front of him was a fusion of attributes. Every martial artist knew one fundamental principle: attributes repel each other. The combined power of thunder and fire had always seemed to him nothing more than a legend. At that moment, Simon attacked. His spear rushed forward in a flash of flame and thunder. Seeing the rapidly approaching strike, Bob used his flame slash technique, purple flames engulfing his blade. The two attacks clashed violently, flames and lightning converging in a blinding explosion of light. However, the moment the spear touched his sword, lightning flashed furiously along the shaft and flames swirled downwards. The force of thunder and fire crashed down on Bob, and finding himself at the very center of the explosion, he admitted that such force was simply absurd. Bob groaned in pain as he was thrown away, breaking through the wall and flying out of the room. As the dust slowly began to settle, the flames and lightning around Simon's spear gradually calmed down. At this moment, a notification appeared in front of the hero that he had received 7 units of combat value. A smile appeared on Simon's face. He had finally gained the required amount of combat value to become a spiritual master. Meanwhile, a few seconds later, outside the students' rooms, Grandmaster Joshua and Bella were waiting for the results. Joshua had prepared several arguments in advance to dissuade Simon from developing several instructional techniques. However, just then, a body flew out of Simon's room. Grandmaster Joshua and Bella looked up in shock. The next moment, the body crashed into the ground right in front of them. The fallen man lay among the rubble, blood flowing from his mouth. Bella gasped in shock when she recognized him as Bob. Grandmaster Joshua's expression instantly changed. It finally dawned on Bella that Simon had defeated Bob. The next moment, powerful beams of energy burst through the roofs of 3 more rooms. 3 figures rushed down. Grandmaster Joshua and Bella froze in place, watching as more figures fell next to Bob. These were the 3 hunters who had gone after the other students, and now they all lay on the ground defeated. Suddenly a voice came from above. It was Sawyer. He remarked that next time they should send someone stronger. Then Evan noticed that there were 4 hunters lying on the ground, not the 3 they had defeated. Sawyer dismissively replied that the 4th martial artist must have been too weak. Hearing this, Bella broke out in a cold sweat. She knew that Bob was not weak at all. On the contrary, he was the strongest among them. Joshua was deep in thought. Evan and Sawyer were in the late stages of the first stage, while Sally was already a spirit master. For them, victory was a natural outcome. But Simon was only at the first step of the entry level. However, Orlando suddenly ran up to them in a panic. The guy excitedly reported that something serious had happened. Joshua turned slightly to him and asked if any of the students had died by accident. However, Orlando quickly explained that he was talking about Simon. During the fight with Bob, the hero used the guidance fusion technique. Hearing this, Grandmaster Joshua froze slightly and said that it was just a fusion technique. However, the very next moment, the meaning of what he had heard reached him, and a huge stream of golden energy flared up around him. After this, he grabbed Orlando by the shoulders and demanded an explanation of what he had said. Orlando quickly replied that Simon had indeed combined the lightning and fire techniques and used them to defeat Bob. After these words, the Grandmaster looked at Bob lying on the ground, who also confirmed that it was indeed a fusion. Joshua stated that the only master who ever managed to achieve this took a full 19 years to do so. In his opinion, Simon was no longer just a monster. He was a heavenly emperor star, a real dragon that had come into the world. Bella asked the Grandmaster if the fusion of attributes really had such incredible power. She wondered if it could allow a first-stage master to defeat Bob, who was almost at the second stage. Joshua explained to her that in the past, a master who had researched fusion could fight second-stage opponents even at the first stage. However, Simon was different from the rest. He managed to successfully combine the attributes in less than a month. He understood perfectly well that if such a monster was allowed to continue to grow, it would one day be able to shake the great emperors. Orlando noted that combining 2 attributes was already extremely difficult, and that merging all 7 was nothing more than a fantasy. Joshua added that if he was allowed to develop all 7 attributes, he might get stuck in the future trying to combine 3 attributes. At that moment, Orlando suddenly remembered another important detail. Simon definitely had a special physique. Bella noted that Simon had 120 units of strength, but managed to crush Bob, who had almost 500 units. Joshua then said that he intended to thoroughly test Simon's fighting power and vitality. He wanted to see what would happen when a monster like Simon faced off against the camp's strongest geniuses. Meanwhile, Simon sat in the ruined room, meditating among the rubble. All his attention was focused solely on his own development. Wanting to advance as quickly as possible, the hero opened the system and invested all his combat value into the spirit characteristic. At that moment, a shining blue aura enveloped him, and Simon finally became a spirit master. He closed his eyes, enjoying the feeling of new strength. Testing his abilities, the boy created a ghostly fist. Telekinetic control seemed a little unusual. After taking a few breaths, Simon checked the interface and confirmed that his spirit meter had surpassed 100%. Then the hero decided to test it in practice. To test his strength, he focused on the bed. In the end, he effortlessly lifted her into the air with just a thought. The hero was happy that he could now walk on air and use telekinetic attacks like Sally. Simon decided to copy Sally's A-rank spiritual martial art and Evan's attack technique in the future. The next morning, an urgent announcement was made, ordering all students to assemble within 1 minute. The students rushed down the stairs in panic. Along the way, they loudly complained that the camp schedule was simply insane. Soon, all the interns gathered in a large crowd in the courtyard. Simon walked over leisurely, stretching and looking as if the events of the previous night had not affected him at all. Instructor Orlando stood in front of the assembled group and noted with a smile that no one was late for the surprise meeting. He admitted that he expected to see many so beaten that they would not even be able to stand on their feet, and praised the students for their resilience. At this point, the student angrily declared that he had lost due to the surprise attack. He had not even been given time to put on his underwear. Orlando responded sarcastically by asking if a real killer would wait for his target to get dressed. Then the student's friend laughed and began to make fun of him, calling him cowards. Watching the proceedings, Simon agreed with the instructor's logic regarding real battles. Orlando has announced a comprehensive testing program to give everyone a chance to prove themselves. The system will evaluate each participant's vitality, combat power, spiritual strength, power, speed, and martial arts. After the check, a ranking will be compiled, and the top 10 students will begin receiving daily contribution points depending on their placement. The crowd immediately came to life. Everyone understood that the first 3 positions would almost certainly go to the elite students. Simon smiled with interest, wondering what the grand prize was that awaited the winner. Orlando quickly calmed the noisy crowd and led everyone to the testing facility. The group then arrived at a huge warehouse. Orlando was standing next to a mechanical device that resembled a spider. Joshua scanned the crowd carefully, quickly noting that his main target was perfectly blended in with the rest. The bandaged student standing next to Simon mistakenly thought the Grandmaster was admiring his potential. Simon himself felt the weight of the Grandmaster's gaze and realized that he was the real target of the surveillance. Joshua announced that whoever took first place would be able to choose a martial art or an A-rank movement technique. Realizing that the 3 elite disciples would fight at full strength, the others began to discuss who would be the winner. Evan's expression immediately turned serious. He knew very well how rare A-rank techniques were. Sally was confident that she could take first place. Sawyer, however, was also full of ambition to acquire a new martial art and combine it with his existing ones. Tempted by yet another A-rank technique, the hero decided to give it his all and take the main prize for himself. Joshua narrowed his eyes as he watched the students' reactions. His goal in this test was to find out the limits of Simon's capabilities. After this, the Grandmaster announced the order of testing. Sawyer was to perform first, then Sally, and then Evan. Hearing this lineup of participants at the very beginning, many students began to whisper nervously. Then the Grandmaster announced the name of the 4th participant. It turned out to be Simon, and the crowd stared at him in shock. However, the hero himself remained calm, finally convinced that he was indeed being targeted. His classmates looked at him with sympathy. They remembered that Simon had come in last place in the entrance exam. Joshua announced that pure physical fighting power would be tested first, followed by the effectiveness of martial arts. Sawyer was the first to approach the device, after which the guy rushed forward and dealt a heavy blow to the car. The screen flashed brightly, showing the score of 4,013 points, and the crowd was speechless. Another student noted that compared to his A-rank movement technique, His strength was considered less developed. Simon realized that Sawyer's physical base had to be strong to withstand the strain of an A-rank movement technique. Meanwhile, the hero prepared a system in advance, intending to copy the next martial art. Soon, Sawyer gathered a vortex of green wind energy around his fist and used the storm fist technique. The tester visibly shook, and the reading on the screen updated to 5,642. The crowd gasped in unison. The result already met the standards of a second-level martial artist. At this time, Simon successfully copied Storm Fist. The B-rank technique only increased Sawyer's stat by about 1,600. Sawyer walked away smugly, and Sally snorted contemptuously and declared that his result looked mediocre. Afterwards, Sally took the basic combat power test and received a score of 3,253. When it was time for the martial arts demonstration, Sally's eyes lit up brightly. Using telekinesis, the girl materialized a huge golden hammer and brought it down on the testing machine. Simon's system instantly copied this ability, obtaining the art of spiritual attribute weapon condensation. The protagonist was delighted with how easy it was to acquire a new skill. Meanwhile, the spiritual hammer was still hanging in the air. Sally then lowered her hand down, pointing the giant spiritual weapon at the tester. A huge hammer struck the device with crushing force. The screen flashed brightly and showed a result of 5,942 points. Many noted that Sally's performance surpassed Sawyer's and was nearly double her base combat power. Simon reflected on how useful spiritual power was in combat, allowing him to walk on air, manipulate objects, and much more. While the test was ongoing, the protagonist attempted to master the art of weapon condensation by gathering energy above himself. Then he snapped his fingers, and the image that had formed quickly dissipated. Simon realized that with this technique, it was possible to create not only weapons, but also any other objects. However, the more material the object became, the more spiritual power was required to maintain it. The hero came to the conclusion that his current supply of spiritual power was insufficient, so he decided to postpone learning the technique. At this moment, Evan was about to go on stage, and the crowd immediately began to cheer him on, praising the strength of the barbarian god's body. Simon watched carefully, wanting to compare it to his own overlord body. Evan warned everyone to watch carefully. This blow was supposed to show the difference between him and the rest of the students. After that, he attacked the car with a purely physical blow, without using any techniques. The students were shocked to find that Evan's physical attack was only about 300 points behind Sawyer's. Joshua expressed approval, genuinely impressed by the elite student's physical prowess. Evan bowed respectfully to the Grandmaster, and then announced that he would now demonstrate his martial art. Watching the scene, Simon was looking forward to seeing the famous A-rank attack martial art. Evan began to channel his power, and pale blue flames erupted and enveloped his right hand. The boy then pulled back his glowing fist as fiery energy raged around him. Upon recognizing the rare ability, Grandmaster Joshua immediately identified it as an A-rank bone flame fist. The hero was pleasantly surprised, remembering that in the pavilion this skill cost 2,800 contribution points. Focusing, Evan finally attacked. His flaming fist slammed into the test machine with great force. The screen flashed and showed an incredible result of 7,534, and the crowd was again plunged into shock. Joshua praised him, noting that he was now inclined to believe his father's words about the future Grandmaster. After the three elite disciples set the bar incredibly high, the Grandmaster finally called Simon onto the stage. As the protagonist moved forward, the students pitied him, believing that anyone who performed after the elite would look pathetic. Joshua told him to use physical force for the first strike, completely forbidding the use of martial arts. The hero calmly agreed. Then Simon took a stance and pulled his hand back. The air around him began to swirl. Wanting to get the main prize, he struck a powerful blow. His fist slammed into the machine, causing a giant shockwave and the test apparatus to shake violently. After this, the screen showed an incredible result of pure physical strength of 6,551 points. Seeing these numbers, Grandmaster Joshua and Instructor Orlando simultaneously broke out in a cold sweat. The entire crowd of students fell silent and then burst into shouts, many wondering if the machine had broken down. No one understood how a student who had placed last in the entrance exam could demonstrate such results. Even the three strongest elite disciples were shocked. Sawyer decided that Simon had secretly reached the second stage. Breaking the tense silence, Simon turned to the instructors and asked if he should move on to the martial arts test. Simon then took his place back in the testing area, while his system processed the skill he had just acquired. The percentage of mastery rapidly increased, and a pale blue fiery aura, which Evan had used earlier, flared up around the hero's body. When the figure exceeded 80%, Simon realized that Evan's A-rank skill was mastering much faster. Orlando assumed that he couldn't have the resources to learn anything above a low-ranking martial art. Joshua narrowed his eyes, sensing the powerful elemental energy, and stated that this technique was definitely not a low-level one. At this moment, Simon's system gave a new signal. His comprehension of the bone underground flame fist reached 100%. He then summoned a pale blue flame around his fist, the crowd instantly recognizing the aura and erupting in surprise. Meanwhile, the protagonist was already eager to try out his new A-rank attack, so he assumed a fighting stance again. Simon rushed forward and slammed his flaming fist into the test machine with great force, causing a huge explosion. The shockwave sent the students flying back, and the trainees screamed in horror as they noticed that the force of the attack was greater than Evan's. When the dust cleared, an incredible score of 9,013 points appeared on the screen. Orlando's sweat dropped, not understanding how a student with 123 vitality could demonstrate such power. Trying to find an explanation, Sally decided that Simon was hiding his real characteristics and that his strength was over 500. To settle the dispute, Simon underwent a separate vitality test, but the machine showed only 137 units. The students started shouting that the tester was definitely broken, but a second measurement confirmed the same result. Some joked that the machine had simply forgotten to add another 0, although everyone was confused by the fact that Simon was a first-level master. When Simon emerged from the capsule, Joshua looked at him carefully, clearly trying to unravel the secrets of this young man. He then restored order and announced the final stage, the practice tournament. Students could choose their own opponents, and the winner would take first place and receive an A-rank martial art. Almost immediately, Sawyer stepped forward and challenged Simon. He reasoned that with such low vitality, the enemy's main weakness was endurance, so he was going to use his speed advantage, dodge his attacks, and gradually wear him down. However, Joshua suddenly stepped in and declined the one-on-one fight. Instead, he ordered 3 of his strongest elite disciples to fight against Simon at the same time. This decision was not liked by anyone. Evans stated that such underestimation irritated him, but Joshua ignored all objections and asked Simon's opinion. The hero replied that he was satisfied with a fight against 3. This response only further angered the elite. Immediately after this, Joshua said that in that case they could begin. After the fight began, Evan and Sally immediately rushed into the attack. Sawyer stayed behind, hoping to wait for the right moment to strike when Simon was distracted. However, the plan fell apart almost instantly, with Sally and Evan yelling at him to get out of the way. Sawyer turned around, but it was too late. Simon had disappeared from view and appeared right behind him. The glowing blue fist was already flying towards its target. Only at the last moment did the blow stop a few centimeters from Sawyer's face. He instantly jumped back, and then thanked Sally for her timely help with telekinesis. The man then warned the others that Simon's speed was far beyond normal limits. Meanwhile, Simon looked curiously at his hand, which was slightly held by telekinetic force. He noted that this was the first time he had encountered such an ability in a real fight, and decided to get rid of Sally first. The next moment, he rushed straight towards the girl at incredible speed. Sally immediately recognized the technique of the flying swan step, which hits the clouds. Sawyer realized that Simon also had the wind attribute and shouted at Evan to stop him. Evan blocked Simon's path and activated the A-rank bone flame fist. He himself prepared to take the blow, and Sally ordered him to hold the enemy with telekinesis. However, instead of dodging, Simon perfectly replicated the same technique, his fist also becoming covered in pale blue flames. Before the attacks collided, Sally sharply increased her telekinetic pressure and completely immobilized the hero. Even the concrete beneath his feet began to crack. Simon noted that her control was much stronger than he expected. Seeing that his opponent was stopped, Sawyer instantly rushed forward and delivered a kick to the head. The master who was watching the fight noted that it was only possible to free oneself from telekinesis through overwhelming physical strength. He even wondered if he had overestimated Simon's capabilities, but Simon himself did not look worried. A smile appeared on his face. The next moment, he released enormous physical force. In just a second, the hero broke the telekinetic hold. Furthermore, the backlash threw Sally back, causing her to lose control of her ability. Having freed himself, the hero easily stopped the attacks of Evan and Sawyer. The collision created a powerful shockwave, once again shocking the spectators. The students couldn't believe that he was able to break through telekinesis and block the attacks of the elite students with just physical strength. Without slowing down for a moment, Simon grabbed Sawyer and Evan, twisting their limbs and completely knocking them off balance. At that moment, both elite students finally realized that they were in truly serious danger. Simon then picked up both opponents and began spinning them in the air as if they weighed nothing. Evan was shocked by how strong their opponent was. After a few turns, he decided they had had enough. Then Simon slammed their faces into the ground with all his might, causing the floor to crack. However, it didn't end there. The hero picked up Evan and Sawyer again and again and threw them with monstrous force into the destroyed floor. Everyone present froze in shock at what they saw. He moved so fast that everything that was happening merged into one blur. When Simon finally released his opponents, both elite fighters fell motionless to the ground and were completely out of the fight. Dust slowly settled around the hero, who stood calmly in the middle of the arena. Then he turned his gaze to the last opponent. Sally met his eyes, raised her hands, and quickly surrendered, asking him to stay back. The students were excitedly discussing what they had seen, amazed that Simon had single-handedly crushed the camp's strongest trio. At this point, Joshua asked if anyone else was willing to challenge Simon, adding that otherwise he would take first place. However, no one even moved. On the contrary, the students retreated back, believing that fighting such an opponent was pointless. Hearing no objections, Joshua declared Simon the winner. Then he instructed the instructor to handle the remaining fights. He invited Simon himself to follow him to receive a reward and choose a new A-rank martial art. A satisfied smile appeared on Simon's face. The victory meant another powerful technique in his collection. On the way, Joshua admitted that he had been watching him since his arrival and asked why he hid his true strength. Simon explained that he did not have the support of an influential family, so he did not want to reveal all his trump cards prematurely. The Grandmaster laughed, approved of this approach, and admitted that the entire tournament had actually been organized for him. He assured Simon that he no longer needed to hide, as he was now under his protection. Soon they arrived at the pavilion. Seeing the Grandmaster, the employee immediately straightened up, and Joshua ordered to bring the main catalog. He invited Simon to ask any questions, and he immediately asked what martial art would be best for him next. Before answering, Joshua asked him to list the techniques he had already mastered, and Simon calmly named them. Upon hearing this, Joshua was visibly surprised, noting that 2 of these techniques were completely absent from the camp's collection. The Grandmaster paused for a moment and admitted that Simon was indeed on a completely different level. Meanwhile, the employee was just trying to figure out who this young man was, whom Joshua himself was personally accompanying. Joshua explained that given Simon's strong attacking techniques and movement skills, it would be better for him to choose control arts. He proposed the A-rank fire cage technique, which allows one to create a construct of fire chi capable of restraining an opponent. Such techniques are significantly more difficult than conventional attacking ones, since they require free control of chi outside the body. Not all second-level masters are capable of this, but Simon's talent allowed him to study it already. After this, Joshua personally demonstrated the technique. A flame erupted in his palm and quickly grew into a huge, fiery cage. He then demonstrated the finishing move, explaining that the opponent must first be locked in and then destroyed with a powerful attack. True, Simon himself would not yet be able to simultaneously support the cage and attack. Joshua only reached this level after moving to the 3rd stage. After listening to the explanation, Simon unexpectedly refused to study the control technique. Joshua was a little surprised, but praised the student for his willingness to listen to advice. In fact, the system screen had already informed Simon that the fire cage had been completely copied during the demonstration. Joshua then proposed the A-rank defensive martial art Earth Armor, which created a strong layer of earth chi around the body. Simon immediately agreed, noting that such protection would be ideally suited to his physical strength. During the conversation, Joshua also inquired about Simon's unique physique. He replied that it was called the body of the Lord. For a moment, the The hero imagined the Grandmaster admiringly acknowledging him as a rare genius. However, in reality, Joshua only honestly admitted that he had never heard of such a physique. The Grandmaster noted that the boost it provided looked truly impressive, especially after Simon's victory. At that moment, his phone rang and Joshua picked it up, clearly distracted from his thoughts. On the other end, he was informed that the contribution points record showed that Simon had been wearing a weighted vest during the fight. The protagonist confirmed this and explained that he did not take off his vest so as not to miss the opportunity to earn contribution points. Joshua tried to maintain his composure, as he realized that Simon was acting far beyond normal expectations. He then told him to stop focusing so much on contribution points and added that there would be plenty of rewards after the trials. After this, the mentor strongly advised him to take off his vest. The hero agreed and began to take it off. The pavilion employee stepped forward and offered to take the vest, explaining that she would return it to the warehouse. However, the moment the vest was in her hands, her expression instantly changed. The vest slipped and fell to the floor with a heavy thud, cracking the stone tiles beneath it. The girl looked at the damage and then asked how much it weighed. Simon calmly replied that it was 5 tons. After that, Joshua put his hand on his shoulder and said that he had another idea for an A-rank martial art. The mentor explained that since he used a spear, he should have paid attention to Oliver from the city of Yan. He had an A-rank thunder spear art, which was famous for its immense power. Joshua offered to challenge Oliver's student, claiming that they could find a way to obtain the martial art. After this, he told Simon to get ready, as the departure was scheduled for early the next morning. Later that night, Simon returned to his room. Upon entering, he immediately noticed that it had already been completely tidied up. Then he sat down on the bed and began to improve. One after another, system notifications appeared in front of him. At the same time, Joshua contacted Oliver and said that he was going to bring his student for a fight. Oliver advised him not to even bother, since the Yang City camp had already raised an outstanding genius with a wood-like spiritual body. Moreover, in just 2 days, this disciple had already advanced his A-rank control technique to the point where his chi could leave his body. Meanwhile, the same student trained, surrounded by waves of green energy, demonstrating his growing strength. Daniel activated the tree prison technique. After this, thick vines burst out and destroyed a nearby table. However, the technology did not last long. Soon the vines dispersed again, turning into green energy. Approaching the student, Oliver noticed that the guy was rushing things too much. However, Daniel stated that it only took him a month to reach the basic level. After this, Oliver turned to Joshua again and stated that his student was too strong for him to challenge him. Having said this, he ended the conversation. He then turned to Daniel and told him to put on a show during the upcoming fight. Daniel agreed with a small smile and held his hand forward as green energy gathered around it. The next afternoon, the high-speed aircraft arrived at the training camp in Yan City. The hero was glad that they had finally arrived at the right place. Simon came outside looking a little tired from the journey. Oliver and his subordinates were already waiting for them there. Oliver came up with a grin and asked where that genius was. Joshua then introduced Simon as a first-tier initial stage spearman. Oliver paused for a moment, clearly confused, and then asked if he was serious. He began to feel uneasy, wondering how his second-ranked disciple would be able to hold his own in a duel like this. However, Joshua did not react to this in any way, and only suggested that they finish the fight quickly and then go eat. Meanwhile, a crowd of students gathered at the arena of the training camp in Yan City, discussing the upcoming spectacle. Some of them spoke about the so-called genius from Star City, and joked that they hoped not to be disappointed in the contender. Soon, Master Oliver introduced everyone to the great Master Joshua and his brilliant student Simon. The hero immediately waved his hand good-naturedly to everyone present. Then, with a smug smile, Oliver reported that Simon was only at the beginning stages of rank 1. The crowd reacted instantly, shocked and insulted that such a weak man would dare to challenge them. They openly mocked Simon and claimed that their champion Daniel had already reached the 2nd rank and would easily deal with him. Oliver stated that if his student wins, Joshua will be obligated to teach him one A-rank martial art. He then added that if Simon somehow managed to win, he would be able to choose an A-rank martial art as a reward. Joshua, clearly amused, patted Zhang on the back and remarked that he had been quite generous. Soon, both participants entered the arena, while the great masters watched the proceedings closely. Oliver quietly reminded Daniel to restrain himself, and the boy nodded, gripping his sword tighter and said that he understood everything. However, with his blade drawn, Daniel continued to worry about how exactly he should behave during the fight. He was afraid that one careless move could end the fight too quickly. Then he noticed something strange. Looking at his opponent, Daniel asked why Simon didn't use the spear he brought with him. The hero replied that he had no intention of using his weapon yet. But in reality, the reason was very simple. The only spear technique Simon knew was just a basic C-rank skill. However, Daniel understood it completely differently. For him, such words sounded like pure arrogance. Wanting to test this attitude in practice, Daniel jumped into the air and rushed forward at full speed. His sword was enveloped in a green aura as he brought the weapon down on his opponent. However, Simon easily stepped aside, allowing the blade to smash into the stone floor and send a cloud of debris into the air. After this, the protagonist smoothly retreated across the entire arena using his A-rank movement technique. Daniel was caught off guard. Realizing that the newcomer was using such a high-level technique, he decided not to give him any room to maneuver. So the guy rushed forward and declared that movement techniques alone would no longer save him. He then activated the wood prison technique. Thick green vines wrapped around Simon's leg. And Simon, seeing such a rare control skill, noted Daniel's talent. However, he remained calm and began to gather strength, preparing to break free. However, before he could do anything, the vines suddenly crumbled and disappeared as if they had never been there. Simon frowned in confusion, wondering how such a technique could fail so quickly. Taking advantage of this moment, Daniel appeared behind him in midair. Lowering his sword, the boy declared that even 1 second of distraction was enough to decide the outcome of the duel. But Simon didn't panic. He just gathered a whirlwind of green wind energy around his fist and instantly counterattacked. The moment he struck, Daniel knew something was wrong. The attack was too fast. It would have reached its target before his sword. The boy then reacted quickly and used the wood escape technique, forming a thick wooden barrier in front of him. However, it didn't help. Simon's fist pierced the defense and shattered the shield into pieces. With a powerful blow, he threw Daniel across the arena. Daniel couldn't quite comprehend what had happened. The brute force of that blow was completely out of proportion to a man of Simon's stature. The other students were no less shocked. They had just seen their champion's A-rank defensive technique destroyed. Joshua laughed and noted how quickly the situation had changed. But Oliver countered that strength alone wasn't enough. He then motioned for Joshua to continue watching, while Simon did not slow down. He instantly closed the distance and delivered a powerful kick. However, the blow passed straight through Daniel, who crumbled into shadows. The protagonist immediately realized that what he saw was just an afterimage. At the same time, Daniel reappeared behind him using his own movement technique and delivered a slashing blow. However, Simon dodged it again without much difficulty. When the dust finally settled, Daniel was already breathing heavily. Looking at Simon, he admitted that the difference in their strength was obvious. The guy then noted that if they were at the same level of development, he would not have had a single chance. After that, he offered to end the fight right then and there. But Simon instead slightly bent down and extended his hand forward. Before Daniel could even comprehend anything, a huge, fiery cage formed around him, trapping him inside. Feeling the heat growing, the boy was stunned that the newbie was able to use such a technique. However, he decided that Simon would not be able to support her for long, so he simply prepared to wait. Joshua never expected that Simon already had the fire cage in his possession. Oliver noticed his reaction and asked why he was surprised by a technique that he allegedly taught the student himself. He asked how the wind-type fighters suddenly used fire, but Joshua waved the question away and quickly turned his attention back to the fight, pointing out that the flames were still burning. He also noticed a new energy that began to gather around Simon's hand. Daniel watched carefully and gradually realized what was happening. Simon simultaneously maintained the fire cage and prepared a new attack. Before Daniel could take any action, the hero rushed forward and drove his glowing fist straight through the flames. Daniel quickly used the tree shoot technique again, creating thick roots in front of him as a shield. However, as before, the defense could not withstand. The attack pierced through it and crashed into his stomach. After this, the guy was thrown back and coughed up blood, unable to withstand the blow. All Daniel could think about was how overwhelming the power of this so-called newcomer was. At that moment, he spat out another large clot of blood. The next moment, the guy crashed straight into the flaming wall of the fire cage. The heat burned his exposed back. However, Almost instantly, bright green energy spread across the burns and removed the damage from his back. Daniel stated that Simon should not underestimate the recovery ability that the level 2 tree spirit body possessed. However, Simon remained calm and said that if one blow was not enough, he would simply continue attacking. Immediately after this, the hero rushed forward and began to deliver a rapid, continuous barrage of glowing blows. It was obvious that he had absolutely no faith in the possibility of the enemy's endless recovery. Daniel took the blows and continued to speak, declaring that all these efforts were pointless. The guy then suggested finding out what would end first: the existence of the fire cell or Simon's own energy. Simon soon noticed that his fire energy was being used up too quickly. Instead of continuing the pressure, he suddenly stopped attacking, and Daniel took it as Simon backing down. After this, he stated that it was now his turn to act, and the outcome of the fight had already been decided. However, this confidence did not last long. Simon calmly formed a clot of lightning in his palm and said that he had not originally intended to use this technique. Seeing this, Daniel felt uneasy. He couldn't believe that a first-level fighter was able to create such power. Realizing that he couldn't let Simon get close, the boy immediately directed all his remaining energy into defense. Daniel raised a huge wall of massive wooden posts, intending to block the attack completely. Simon took a step forward, dodging the attack, and then his eyes flashed with a bright golden light. He then pulled his fist back as lightning rapidly built up around him. Then he delivered the crushing blow. The blow tore through the wooden wall effortlessly, as if it didn't exist at all, and crashed squarely into Daniel's face. After that, he was thrown back. Without even having time to come to his senses, the guy collapsed to the ground and instantly lost consciousness. Simon stood calmly in place as the flames slowly died down and debris settled around the arena. For a few moments, the entire arena was plunged into absolute silence. Many compared this attack to an S-rank technique and couldn't believe that Simon was still only at the early stages of level 1. Meanwhile, Oliver turned to Joshua and demanded to know what kind of monster he had brought with him. Simon used elemental fusion, which was considered nearly impossible for a fighter of his level. Joshua noted that he hadn't really intended to mention that Simon had mastered the fusion of 2 elements in just 1 month. He added that Simon has full compatibility with all 7 elements and developed 7 different techniques. Then Joshua pretended to say too much and casually apologized. Oliver stood motionless, trying to comprehend how the student had achieved so much in just 1 month. Seizing the right moment, Joshua placed a friendly hand on his shoulder and reminded him of the bet they had made. Sometime later, we find ourselves in a huge training room. There, Simon stood opposite Grandmaster Oliver in an arena surrounded by training spears. Oliver watched the young intern closely, continuing to reflect on the unusual nature of his talent. He presented the technique he was about to show: the A-rank spear martial art. 9 heaven-destroying spears. Blue lightning began to crackle around his hand. Oliver reported that the art consisted of 3 stances, and each stance in turn included 3 separate techniques. Furthermore, the technique was so demanding that he usually did not teach it to anyone below the 4th level. After this, Oliver ordered a close watch. Then he announced the first stance, River Turn, and brought his spear down. A huge wave of lightning crashed down onto the arena from above and swept through the entire space. Without stopping for a second, the master immediately moved on to the second technique, announcing the C-flip stance. He then swung his spear wide, and a giant stream of lightning rushed forward, spreading across the arena like an ocean. Simon held his spear tightly and watched intently. Standing in the middle of this spectacle, he felt incredibly small. However, Oliver had no intention of stopping. He jumped high into the air and went into his 3rd stance called Heaven Destruction. Watching what was happening, Simon realized that Oliver was deliberately holding back so as not to destroy the room. However, even in this state, the power on display looked truly overwhelming. However, the protagonist did not feel fear. On the contrary, he decided that one day he would definitely reach the same level of strength. When the storm finally cleared, Oliver approached him and handed him a small manual describing the technique. He then said that Simon should start training, and that if he had any questions, he could contact him later. Simon sincerely thanked the master for his instructions, and Oliver responded by noting that he was merely fulfilling the terms of the bet. He also added that after mastering the first stance, he would teach Simon another technique, Thunder Palm. After this, the master mentioned that, despite all the power of the spear technique, it was still inferior to his highest skill. Meanwhile, Oliver headed for the exit. He said that he needed to discuss something with Joshua. About an hour later, Simon was still in the center of the training dome. Oliver finally returned and asked him if he had begun to understand the principles of the technique, although he thought there was no hurry. However, it was at that moment that a flash of golden lightning suddenly erupted from Simon's direction. The protagonist raised his spear and struck, causing electricity to cut through the air. When things finally calmed down, Simon admitted that the spear technique had proven much more difficult than he had expected. Before Oliver could say anything, Simon continued the conversation and directly asked to be taught Thunder Palm. However, Oliver did not answer immediately. Instead, he continued to silently look at the arena, trying to comprehend what he saw. Later, when the sun was already setting, Oliver went outside. He stood on the steps near the dome and silently looked into the distance. At that moment, Joshua approached him and asked what happened and whether Thunder Palm's training had already ended. Joshua walked into the training dome, muttering under his breath that Oliver hadn't been pushing himself to his full potential. However, as soon as the master opened the door, he stopped abruptly. Simon was standing there, and his entire body was enveloped in vortexes of lightning. The protagonist turned to the newcomer with a satisfied expression on his face and announced that he had finally mastered the Thunder Palm. Joshua froze, trying to comprehend what he saw. He expected rapid progress, but not this much. It was then that he realized that Simon's potential had no limits, and even the 9th level no longer seemed unattainable. Soon, Oliver entered the dome and suggested that they stop standing there and go get a bite to eat instead. Later that night, Simon sat in his room, taking stock of recent events. After defeating Evan and his 2 comrades, as well as Daniel, he received 230 combat value. After examining the indicators, Simon came to the conclusion that vitality, spiritual strength, and physique were still too weak. Simon sighed, realizing he needed a more efficient way to gain combat value. Since no one else in the camp wanted to spar with him, he decided to hunt in the Hall of Fierce Beasts from now on. Meanwhile, in one of the nearby restaurants, Oliver was already noticeably drunk. He slammed the table and started complaining to Joshua, accusing him of cheating him out of 2 high-ranking martial arts. Their dinner was suddenly interrupted by the instructor's assistant, who announced that an event called Night Raid would soon begin. Oliver, with difficulty pronouncing the words, ordered them to begin, adding that no leniency should be shown to the students. It was only a moment later that Joshua reminded Oliver that Simon was also in the camp dorm that night. Meanwhile, mysterious people were moving quickly across the roofs of the dormitories. 2 of them, Ethan and Philip, stopped on the ledge of one of the buildings. Ethan explained that Oliver personally invited him because of 1 student besides. He also added that fighting against a 2nd-level novice fighter seemed like overkill to him. Then Ethan, with a grin, reminded his brother how he lost during the night raid at the Star City camp. Philip replied irritably that if he met Simon again, he would no longer hold back. Meanwhile, the leader ordered everyone to put on masks and listen carefully to further instructions. After the participants had put on their black masks, he gave the command to move forward and was the first to rush forward. The night raid throughout the dormitory, the corridors filled with cries of a surprise attack. Simon peered cautiously out of his room, trying to figure out if there really was a night raid going on outside. In the hallway, he saw one of the attackers attack a student who had just come out of the shower and was wrapped only in a towel. A second later, the robber noticed Simon and told his comrades that they had missed another person. However, Simon met him with a sharp blow from below to the chin. The attacker flew up and smashed his head through the ceiling panels. The hero noted with displeasure that the attackers were attacking people without explaining anything, which was not part of this camp at all. Looking up at the raiders stuck in the ceiling, Simon confirmed that what was happening was indeed a night raid. He carefully examined the black clothes and covered faces of the participants in the operation. And then, an interesting idea came to him. The protagonist decided that if he changed into the same clothes, he would be able to move freely around the building. Meanwhile, in another part of the building, the guy found himself cornered, still wearing only a towel. It was at this moment that another masked figure appeared in the doorway, the stranger saying that he had come to help. The attacker turned around, but didn't have time to react. The disguised Simon stepped forward and struck his opponent straight in the face. The raider flew back and crashed hard into the wall. The guy was stunned by what he saw and wondered in confusion whether the raid participants had started fighting each other. However, Simon immediately ran back into the corridor anticipating that he would be able to get a lot of benefits that night. He noted that since the opponents turned out to be strong, there was no longer any need to hold back. The raiders fell one by one, and soon realized that there was someone among them who was not on their side. However, it was too late. The hero dealt with them. Having cleared the first floor, Simon finally exhaled. Now it's time for the second floor. Then he jumped to the second one and hit one of the raiders right in the air. As he continued to fight, the system was constantly updating, and the hero laughed, noting that he had hit the jackpot. When he reached the third floor, he saw several raiders at the doorway, watching the battle inside. They discussed how Daniel had held up surprisingly well against Ethan, a high-level second-rank fighter. When Simon approached, he was informed that the rest of the students had already been defeated, and only one with the body of a tree spirit remained in the ranks. Then, Simon declared that there was no point in waiting any longer, and his hand glowed with energy. The others looked at him in bewilderment, but the next second he attacked. The raiders were thrown straight into the room where the battle was taking place. Ethan, surrounded by a red aura, turned towards the noise and demanded to know why his people were being attacked. Both he and Daniel, whose body was glowing green, looked towards the entrance, where Simon stood, enveloped in bright yellow energy. Looking calmly at both of them, the protagonist suggested attacking together. Ethan told Daniel to step back and recuperate while he dealt with the intruder. He immediately rushed towards Simon, shouting that he was about to learn a hard lesson. However, Simon gathered golden energy in his palm and met his opponent face to face. The next moment, their fists collided, causing a powerful explosion. The collision was so powerful that Ethan lost his balance. The man staggered back, holding his arm. He clearly did not expect such overwhelming force and realized that he was facing no ordinary opponent. Without wasting any time, Ethan called Daniel for help. He instantly activated the tree prison technique. At that moment, huge vines burst out of the ground, trying to catch Simon. However, the hero jumped back with lightning speed. Taking advantage of the moment, Ethan appeared behind him and struck, but the fist crashed into the glowing purple armor of earth energy that had formed around Simon's body. Ethan could hardly believe his eyes. He began to wonder where this monster came from. He couldn't understand how someone could block an attack from a high-level second-rank fighter so easily. Before he could fully comprehend what was happening, Simon disappeared from sight. However, a second later, he slammed Ethan into the wall. The impact shattered the instructor's armor, and he began coughing up blood. But Simon didn't stop. He immediately rushed past the shocked Daniel. The hero hit him on the back of the head with a flaming fist, sending him face first into the ground. Daniel instantly lost consciousness from the blow. After the battle ended, the system awarded Simon combat value points for defeating both opponents. The next morning, Daniel and Ethan stood next to the rest of the wounded raiders, all looking battered and exhausted. Oliver was furious. Pointing at the wounded group, he loudly blamed everything on Joshua's disciple. Eventually, he lost patience, ordered them to leave, and personally drove out his rival. Then Joshua suddenly asked Simon if he still lacked the combat techniques of the metal, wood, and water elements. With a slight smile, the mentor hinted that it was time to visit a few more old friends. Over the next 10 days, Simon and Joshua traveled to 3 training camps. Back at the dorm, Simon focused on absorbing everything he had learned. During his meditation, the system confirmed that he had successfully mastered the initial stages of 3 A-rank martial arts. Just recently, mastering even 1 A-rank art seemed impossible. But now he already had several such techniques. Since he had been accumulating points for a long time, he finally decided to increase his vitality. As soon as he began to pour all the points into his own body, a wave of heat swept through his body, and the energy spread everywhere. Despite the pain, he was pleased to know that he was now only 50 points away from becoming a second-rank martial artist. After checking the remaining points, he found exactly 100 units. For some time, Simon thought about where to spend them. In the end, he chose to improve the body of the Overlord. The system absorbed all 100 points, but only increased the spirit rank by 0.1%. Simon looked extremely annoyed. Improving this particular physique was incredibly expensive. After thinking for a while, he decided that reaching the second rank was more important now, so he headed to the room of fierce beasts. However, before he could leave, Simon ran into Joshua. The master asked if the hero still lacked the healing martial art. Soon, the two of them arrived at the training camp of Han City, where Grandmaster Vance announced a survival test. He reported that the students were sent into the mountain range for 7 days without any external supplies. Simon quickly noticed the difference between Han City and Star City. The participants there were stronger. As soon as the test officially began, Simon immediately rushed into the mountain range along with everyone else. Vance noted that Simon hadn't even reached rank 2 yet, but Joshua remained calm and reminded him of their bet. This proposal amused Vance, and he wondered whether he could really afford such a promise. Joshua, however, argued that facing stronger beasts early on would only have accelerated Simon's development. However, his expression changed after hearing the news that creatures associated with the demonic cult had also appeared in the mountains. Joshua just sighed heavily and resigned himself to the situation. He decided that it would already be a success if Simon returned alive at all. Meanwhile, deep in the wilderness, Simon cut off the head of a huge wolf-like beast. Wanting to test his newly learned techniques, the hero then released beams of golden energy that pierced through an entire flock of monsters. Immediately after this, the vines quickly shot forward, wrapped around the giant snake and completely crushed it. As night fell over the mountain range, Simon decided to test his water skills. He released a huge water dragon, which destroyed the fire beast with overwhelming power. The new techniques were powerful, but using multiple A-rank martial arts in a row drained spiritual energy. With his life force finally reaching its limit, the hero decided it was time to try and break through to rank 2. Sitting down to meditate, he began to channel all his newly earned points into his life force. At the same time, somewhere deep in the forest, a cultist wandered in the darkness and complained discontentedly about the night patrols. He was sure that no one would ever discover their hidden lands, hidden in such a remote mountainous region. However, while passing by one of the caves, the man suddenly noticed something. He saw the fresh corpse of a giant beast lying near the entrance to the cave. Realizing that an intruder had entered their territory, the cultist approached the cave and addressed the one hiding inside. At the same time, he warned with a dangerous smile that refusing to obey would only make everything much more painful. Looking at the tiger lying nearby, the cultist guessed that the intruder possessed a strength of approximately the 2nd rank. Since the cultist spoke like that about 3rd-rank masters, Simon suspected that he was facing a dangerous 4th-rank expert. Considering that he himself had only recently reached the 2nd rank, the hero admitted that he did not feel confident in fighting against him. Therefore, he instantly released a water dragon attack from the cave, creating an opportunity for escape. Seeing the approaching attack, the cultist grinned widely. He was glad that his opponent had finally shown himself. Drawing his sword, he cut the water dragon in half with one swing, and noted that the technique only had the power of an early 2nd-rank attack. As soon as the man noticed Simon running away, he immediately gave chase. While pursuing him, the cultist noted that for such a young age, victories over powerful beasts looked quite impressive. After some time, the cultist suddenly became confused when Simon completely stopped running. Calmly turning to his pursuer, the hero explained that after the last attack, he felt his energy. Simon realized that he was only a 3rd-rank initial stage and was nowhere near as scary as he had initially seemed. At the same time, Simon noticed a strange tattoo on the man's neck and immediately recognized the symbol of the demonic cult of the 10,000 races. This organization consisted of traitors to humanity who carried out terrorist attacks and sacrificed their fellow tribesmen for the sake of power. Simon released a golden aura with obvious disgust and declared that such scum deserved nothing but death. However, the cultist smirked and, wanting to demonstrate superiority, used the A-rank martial art, Fire Slash. A huge flaming blade rushed towards Simon. Since this was his first real fight against a 3rd-rank martial artist, the hero decided not to hold back. He immediately responded with the inverted C technique, releasing a gigantic storm of golden lightning and water energy. He completely crushed the fire attack. Even Simon himself was slightly surprised at how easily his technique suppressed his opponent's martial art. Meanwhile, the cultist panicked. He couldn't understand how a person who was 1 level below him was so superior to him. Annoyed by what was happening, the man unleashed a barrage of sword blows on his opponent. But Simon dodged each attack. Then, using the movement technique, he disappeared from sight and in a moment found himself behind the enemy. Without hesitation, the hero released another stream of golden lightning. After this, Simon called upon the Sea Walk attack. The cultist realized that this attack was significantly more powerful than the Fire Slash and tried to retreat. However, before he could escape, thick green vines burst from the ground and wrapped tightly around his leg. Realizing that Simon also mastered wood attribute techniques, the man froze in shock. Completely bound by vines, he no longer had a single chance to dodge the lightning strike, and the explosion completely engulfed him. When the smoke cleared, Simon looked at the charred remains of the cultist. However, after a few moments, the bodies strangely began to sink into the ground, like melted mud. The hero wondered if the enemy had managed to survive thanks to an unusual technique. Soon the cultist appeared again, his body now covered in thick stone armor that resembled solidified magma. He looked extremely furious and cursed his own misfortune for meeting a human genius in such a remote place. The cultist warned Simon that there was no escape this time, after which his body began to change even more. Enormous wings burst out from his back, and he demanded that Simon witness the power of the celestial race. However, Simon only noticed that the cultist had turned into a monster, and then called the entire demonic cult insane. The cultist casually grabbed the tip of Simon's spear with his armored hand. He proudly declared that after completing the bloodline transformation, he would become a true celestial being. Still holding the spear, he also declared that Simon must die for interfering with their sacrificial ritual. Simon responded immediately. A blast of fire shot forward and pierced one of the cultist's wings. Taking advantage of this, the hero instantly activated the flame cage. Thus, he imprisoned his enemy in a fiery prison. Immediately after, he channeled lightning energy into his spear and used the finishing stance, Heavenbreaker. The lightning-coated weapon pierced the cultist's reinforced stone armor. Then it exploded with destructive force right in his chest. The magma armor began to crumble, and after a few seconds, the cultist's body completely fell apart. When the battle was over, Simon checked the system and found that he had received 212 points for killing just one cultist. He then quickly realized that hunting these fanatics was much more rewarding than fighting the beasts. Then the hero remembered that the cultist had mentioned some kind of ritual and assumed that there were prisoners somewhere nearby. Meanwhile, at the Han City training camp, Joshua checked the message he had received. After this, he informed Vance about the activities of the demonic cult in the mountains and the sacrificial ritual being carried out there. Joshua explained that this time the cult was sacrificing its own followers, meaning there were no innocents among them. Hearing this, Vance asked why Joshua was still sitting here drinking tea instead of going to save his student. In response, Joshua calmly stated that there was no reason to panic, since Simon had already killed a third-rank cultist in the initial stage. 3 days later, deep in the wilderness, Simon stood next to the freshly severed head of a giant, multi-eyed snake. But even after 3 days of continuous hunting of third-rank beasts, he only managed to collect 832 combat value points. It was at this moment that his senses suddenly became aware of someone's presence nearby. A blue-haired woman stood on a tree branch above him, and she smiled and praised Simon for noticing her so quickly. She said that she could even love him under different circumstances, but now he had invaded their territory, so she would kill him. Without giving him a second to react, she unleashed a hail of deadly ice spikes in his direction. However, instead of worrying, Simon suddenly smiled. He was glad that the demonic cultist came to him herself. In response, he summoned a giant water dragon and sent it towards the attack. The two vehicles collided with tremendous force, causing smoke and steam to spread throughout the area. As soon as the smoke began to clear, the cultist went on the attack again. A long whip came rushing towards Simon, but the boy instantly intercepted it right out of the air. Instead of killing his opponent immediately, the hero decided that she could still be useful. First of all, he wanted to know the location of other demonic cult bases. Simon pulled the whip towards himself with force and pulled the woman towards him. Then, with a powerful blow from the ice fist to the stomach, he instantly incapacitated her. Standing over his wounded opponent, Simon lowered the glowing spear to her neck and demanded to know the location of the cult's base. The frightened woman quickly gave in and said that the base was located about 10 kilometers to the north. The cultist admitted that there were 3 third-rank experts and 3 second-rank fighters at the base. Since Simon had already killed several cultists earlier, this meant that only 1 third-rank fighter remained alive. However, the cultist suddenly attacked again. Not wanting to admit defeat, she activated the bloodline transformation. Enormous wings sprouted from her back, and her body began to change. taking the form of a representative of the heavenly divine race. However, Simon didn't even let her finish. He thrust his spear forward and released a giant column of golden lightning. It pierced her chest completely, and her transformed body gradually returned to normal. Then Simon pulled out his spear and demanded that he give up his glasses. The system immediately awarded him another 208 combat value points, which left the hero extremely pleased. Meanwhile, on the cult's territory, a small group of students from the city of Han found themselves trapped near a stone pyramid. Realizing they were surrounded, the students panicked. The information they had received earlier turned out to be wrong. The blood cult commander calmly ordered his subordinates to destroy the intruders. Noticing several second-ranked geniuses among the students, the cultists rushed forward with enthusiasm. The students, now surrounded, quickly gathered together and decided to fight to the end, hoping to eventually receive revenge. Meanwhile, Vance proudly pointed out the 3 best geniuses of Han City and praised them for their courage. He explained that he intended to let them suffer a little in order to gain combat experience, and would only intervene if there was danger. Joshua just smiled and calmly noted that none of them would have to interfere. He then announced that his little monster named Simon was already on his way to the valley to rescue Vance's students. Hearing this, Vance looked at him as if he had completely gone crazy. Meanwhile, below, one of the city's best students, Han, stepped forward to protect his comrades. At that moment, one of the cultists rushed at them with glowing red claws, laughing that no one would escape alive. The student prepared to receive the final attack, but suddenly a spear, shrouded in golden lightning, flew across the entire battlefield. It instantly slammed the cultist into a tree. His dead body was firmly nailed to the tree trunk with a huge spear. The remaining cultists immediately stopped and furiously demanded to know who dared to interfere. And then Simon appeared on the battlefield, arriving in a flash of lightning right in front of the stunned students. Without slowing down, the hero grabbed 2 cultists by the heads and then pushed them together with great force. After this, he turned sharply and unleashed a barrage of lightning-fast blows on the enemies. In an instant, he destroyed several more opponents. Once the area was clear, Simon casually asked the shocked students if they had been seriously injured. The students immediately recognized him as Simon and couldn't believe that such a young guy could deal with rank 3 experts so easily. Watching from above, Vance demanded to know why Joshua's student was using such powerful lightning techniques. Even Joshua was stunned, suddenly realizing that Simon had managed to go from rank 1 to rank 2 in just a few days. Meanwhile, Simon ordered the Han City disciples to retreat while he dealt with the remaining enemies. As soon as they were out of sight, a greedy smile appeared on the hero's face. He realized that the cultist had lied. There weren't just a few third-rank fighters here. In fact, there were more than a dozen. But that was even better. Suddenly, a huge cultist rushed straight at him, declaring that he was going to tear him to pieces. However, Simon calmly dodged, slipped past the defense, and delivered a heavy blow to the stomach. The force of the blow was so great that the massive cultist was thrown to the ground. Calmly turning to the remaining enemies, the hero announced that it was now their turn. After demonstrating such force, the surviving cultists immediately began to retreat. Meanwhile, another man climbed the steps of the pyramid as the terrified cultists begged to be saved. Having reached the top, he took a deep breath. However, instead of worrying about the victims, he stated that their sacrifice was completely justified. Simon frowned as the blood from each dead body suddenly began to rise upwards. Streams of blood joined together and rushed to the top of the pyramid, swirling around the commander's body. At that moment, the protagonist realized that this was a cult ritual. Suddenly, the blood burst into a blinding light. When the glow disappeared, the commander had already turned into a blond man with huge white wings. He demanded to know why the pathetic humans did not kneel before a representative of the heavenly divine race. Meanwhile, Simon gripped his spear tighter and smiled excitedly. If even a cultist brought such a generous reward, then killing a representative of the celestial race could bring even more. The representative of the heavenly race looked at Simon with disdain and declared that he should pay with his life for looking at him. However, before the hero had time to react, the man suddenly disappeared and a moment later was behind him. Even Simon was caught off guard by the speed. He barely managed to block the blow. However, the force of the collision still split the earth and sent powerful shockwaves through the valley. The blonde grinned smugly, Realizing that Simon was significantly stronger than most human fighters, Simon wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and immediately realized how dangerous the heavenly divine race was. God admitted that, having seen Simon's power, he decided to kill this genius immediately before he became a serious threat. Then cracks appeared on his body, and he noted with irritation that this body could hardly withstand his divine power. However, the opponent stated that even a peak rank 3 was more than enough to destroy Simon. Simon finally realized that what lay before him was merely a vessel that had been taken possession of by a representative of the heavenly divine race. This time, the guy said that the outcome of this battle had not yet been decided. Immediately after this, both opponents rushed forward, their fists colliding again and again, shaking the entire valley. As Joshua watched the scene unfold, he noticed that the heavenly divine race truly lived up to its reputation. Vance could not understand how a fighter of a lower level could not only withstand the onslaught of his opponent, but surpass him. Finally, Simon delivered a powerful strike, covered in lightning, which forced the winged enemy to retreat. The sky god stared at him in disbelief and demanded to know what a monstrous physique he possessed. He admitted that in all his battles with the greatest geniuses, he had never lost a direct clash of pure force. Meanwhile, Simon suggested to the sky god to continue the fight if he still had strength left. Ever since he awakened as the Overlord, he had been constantly worried that he could kill ordinary opponents too easily. Simon admitted that he would have preferred to face the god's actual body, as the vessel kept the battle from becoming exciting. Hearing this, the heavenly god instantly became enraged. Feeling humiliated, he activated his strongest technique, and then suddenly a giant golden portal, like a black hole, opened in the sky. From its depths, countless shining spears began to slowly emerge, hovering over the battlefield. God announced that Simon was the first person to force him to use the Divine Arsenal technique. It was then that the system notified him that the Divine Arsenal technique was impossible to copy or learn. Vance explained that this skill was an innate art, available only to members of the celestial divine race. Vance immediately called on Joshua to intervene before Simon was killed, but he stated that there was no reason to panic. He then revealed that Simon had perfect compatibility with all 7 elements. Meanwhile, God declared that if this man was allowed to develop, he would become a threat to the entire race in the future. So he decided that Simon had to die right there, and the divine arsenal came into action. Thousands of shining golden spears rained down on Simon, but the protagonist only smiled. He replied that the heavenly god was also the first opponent who made him fight seriously. Lightning exploded around Simon's spear as he activated the 3rd stance of the 9 heaven-destroying spears technique. Then, with a powerful upward movement, the guy released a giant stream of lightning energy. The attack easily broke through the falling golden spears and instantly shattered them into pieces. The sky god watched in horror and declared that such power was impossible. However, before he could do anything, a devastating stream of lightning crashed straight into him. A huge explosion covered the entire battlefield. The possessed cultist's body instantly turned to ashes. The attack was so powerful that it even split the giant stone pyramid in half. At that moment, the system notified the hero of the reward. He received 843 points, and the hero immediately realized that the battle had been completely worth it. A moment later, Vance landed next to him and began praising Simon, calling him a priceless genius. The master grabbed the guy by the face and admitted that he would never have believed such a thing if he hadn't seen it with his own eyes. Despite the praise, Simon thought that the true elite geniuses of these races must have been incredibly dangerous. Vance also came to the conclusion that defeating one low-ranking heavenly god was not yet a reason for pride. 4 days later, the wilderness survival test officially concluded at the Han City camp. When the results came in, Simon took first place by a landslide, scoring an incredible 17,210 points. Many students refused to believe that a person of a lower level of development could earn so many points. However, the students of Han City, whom Simon had previously saved, quickly came to his defense. Vance complained to Joshua, still not believing what was happening. Simon managed to master the healing art in just half a day. Meanwhile, Simon sat alone in the training room, meditating. He was amazed at how effective this A-rank martial art was. Thanks to battles in the wild, his combat value points have exceeded 41,800. Meanwhile, on the home planet of the heavenly divine race, a meeting was taking place in the palace of the heavenly gods. A giant creature, resembling a living statue, demanded to know how one of their clan's members had lost to a human. The blonde admitted that the man they were facing was an unprecedented monster among geniuses. Soon, another clan member named Theos, who had been specially called to the meeting, came forward. Realizing the threat Simon posed to the future of their race, the statue demanded that the boy be eliminated as quickly as possible. Theos accepted the task, and the statue demanded a report on the search for fragments of the artifact hidden on human territory. The subordinate reported that they had not yet managed to obtain a single fragment, but they had intercepted some interesting information. The statue then ordered the search to continue in secret, so that humanity would remain unaware of their actions.